How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Like, watch Discovery. She has this thing.
Oh, okay.
She has this thing now where every show I freaking suggest, she hates. Like, she's like, nah, I'm not feeling that.
And then she watches
really
it and loves it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that happened with Discovery again. Like, I kept saying Discovery, and finally I just played it the other day, and I was just like, we're watching this right now. It was like last weekend, and now we're already almost through season 1, because she loves it, and she only wants to watch Discovery. And I was like, we're not watching this anymore. You hated this. You were not into this. You didn't want to watch Star Trek.
I feel like she has always done that, Gary.
That's been our whole relationship. It's basically it. Like, I mean, I even suggested WandaVision the other day because I was like, man, this looks fun. Let's watch this. She's like, well, I don't care anything about that. But then she was talking to her friend from work, Ashley, and Ashley said, this WandaVision show looks really interesting. And she's like, I think I'm going to want to watch WandaVision and see.
So she
just trusts my opinion.
She's not down for whatever you're into.
Somehow that's my wife. Anyway. Well, hello and welcome to the Cinema Shock. It is
the Cinema Shock.
The Cinema Shock. The Cinema Shock.
Not to be confused with any of the other Cinema Shocks.
No, it's the Cinema Shock.
What's a Cinema Shock?
God damn it, Marlene.
So this is the show where we break down movies and give you all the behind the scenes details and go deep dives into your favorite cult and genre cinema. That's what we do here. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I'm co-host Justin Bishop. Got a good news, bad news scenario here today, Gary. Unfortunately, Todd is no longer with us, but we are luckily joined today by someone who sounds and looks a little bit like him in low light and from the right angle. Mr. Rod J. Davis is with us today. Welcome to the show, Rod.
Rod J. Davis. What's weird is I didn't know.
Dr.
Rod
J. Davis.
I
What's
didn't
your
know
doctorate
that-
in, Rod?
Thank you.
Thugonomics? Is that?
Yes. I majored in fuckery and with a minor in douchebaggery. And
it's so weird, though. I didn't realize, Rod, that you would look so much like Todd, just at the right angle, at least the right ethnicity.
it's a popular look. It's a popular look.
Well, so what I ended up doing was I printed out and taped a picture of Todd's face on my screen right here where you are. So it's basically the same thing.
I mean, it's pretty close. Like it's if you're paying attention to your girl that you brought to the theater or to the podcast, then you might blink and miss that it's not Todd A. Davis. It's actually,
In order to find a replacement, we simply stuck our head out the window and yelled, "Hey, we're doing a podcast!" And a bunch of white dudes with beards showed up.
I was about to say, we put out a WAD ad for a bearded white guy. Turns out super easy to find.
yeah.
Most of them have podcast experience.
So this week, y'all, is episode 4 of our 6 Degrees of Kill Bill series, where, of course, we are talking about a bunch of movies that are direct inspiration to Quentin Tarantino's 2004 film Kill Bill. And whenever you mention Kill Bill, there is, I think, one iconic image that comes to mind, and that is Uma Thurman as the bride, dressed in that yellow jumpsuit with a black racing stripe down the side. But that tracksuit, it became iconic years before Uma ever put it on. It was worn originally by the legendary Bruce Lee in the film that we're talking about today, one of the most infamous unfinished projects in the history of film, The Game of Death.
He is an international superstar. They call him a living legend. But the woman he loves belongs to the mob. And now, They're out to own him.
Don't be a slow learner, Billy.
Billy!
If they can't buy him, they'll have to kill him.
Billy!
You don't have too many choices. A final warning.
And so begins the game of death. Columbia Pictures presents the immortal Bruce Lee in his greatest motion picture adventure, Game of Death. It begins as a matter of principle. It becomes a matter of survival. As the undisputed master of the martial arts becomes a master of disguise and the champion of the Game of Death. This is the final film of Bruce Lee. 4.5 years in production with an international all-star cast.
You lose, Carl Miller.
Bruce Lee single-handedly takes on an underworld army and fights for his life in the Game of Death. The final film of Bruce Lee. Game of Death.
All right, so this one, guys, this one's going to be fun.
I feel like that's racist, Todd.
Was that racist? It's just music. It's just music, guys.
This is a tough one to discuss because this movie has, one, a very complex history. And if you were to just jump into the story of Game of Death without discussing the rest of Bruce Lee's career, it's not going to mean quite as much, because where Bruce Lee was at the time that he started filming Game of Death is kind of a big part of this film's story.
We already have some discrepancy because you said it was part of one of the most iconic scenes in Kill Bill, or images from Kill Bill. But for me, it was Buck's vehicle. That's the first thing I think of from Kill Bill.
You mean the pussy wagon?
The pussy wagon. And
well, that's the
Buck
second
is here to
thing.
fuck. And
Listen,
Or to party, depending on which version you're watching.
To be honest, I still haven't made it I haven't made it past Uma Thurman wiggling her big toe. That kind of
that really gets you going.
That does it for me. That's where I stop
So
right there.
I'm sure that we will discuss in greater detail some of the other films of Bruce Lee's career at some point. We have actually already discussed Enter the Dragon, about a year and a half ago on our old show. I think Todd was there for that one too, weren't you, Todd?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, you were on as a special guest.
He's usually our go-to for kung fu movies.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna give
despite my love of Crippled Masters, you guys trust me
somehow that was
with
the
kung
first
fu.
one the first movie you brought on our show, and we still let you back.
Not that it was a bad choice for the show, just that it was a bad choice that you thought it was a Hall of Fame movie. Like,
oh, let's not get it. It's that's a whole nother. This is a whole nother discussion. We'll be here all damn day.
So Bruce Lee was born on November 27th, 1940. Birth name was Jun Fang Lee. He was born in the Chinatown district of San Francisco. And according to the Chinese zodiac, he was born in both the hour and the year of the dragon, hence his nickname of the dragon, or Little Dragon, as he was known as a kid.
And his terrible dragon breath.
Lee and his parents ended up returning to Hong Kong, which is where they were from, of course, when he was only 3 months old. And Bruce, he wasn't very interested in school when he was a kid. He wasn't a great student. He would often skip class to hang out on the streets with his friends. See, his father's name was Lee Hoi Chen. He was a very famous Cantonese opera star, and they were also pretty wealthy. They were one of the wealthiest families in Hong Kong, not only because of his fame, but because he had a lot of like rental properties and stuff that he made money from. So they were very well off. One result of his fame, though, was that Bruce was introduced to film at a very young age. He started appearing in movies when he was like 6 years old, I think. And he had his first leading role at the age of 9, appearing alongside his father in a movie called The Kid in 1950.
Not to be confused with the Charlie Chaplin.
Same movie.
Is it the same movie?
No.
Oh,
No, it's not.
I was like, wait, what?
A young Bruce
I was
Lee.
like, that's not it.
The interesting thing about the opera is that this movie has like little things peppered throughout it that seem to be like callbacks to Bruce Lee, or like trying to pay tribute to Bruce Lee. On one hand, it's like very respectful of Bruce Lee, like it seems like it wants to be, and then at some point, sure, like you guys are fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? But like the Peking opera, I think Bruce Lee's dad primarily worked as like that Roy, what's his name, Chao. I will probably mispronounce names, like you always point out, Justin.
Yeah. It's all right. We're
But
doing.
he plays Lee's uncle in
Yes.
in the movie. Like he was there. He had worked there, and like he had also been in other Bruce Lee movies. That guy was in like Temple of Doom and Bloodsport, and he's all over the place. But anyway, like even Jackie Chan has like roots in that Peking Opera house and stuff. So it was just like it was a callback or like something, you know, they were trying to give like a shout out there. Which was kind of interesting.
So by the time he was 18 years old, Bruce had already appeared in 20 films. He oftentimes played like kids that were getting, you know, little punk kids getting in fights even as a teenager. You know, that was he was already fighting on screen. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he was already fighting on screen. When he was 12 years old, Bruce Lee started attending an all-boys Catholic school there in Hong Kong, where he continued to be kind of an underachiever in academics. His teachers there saw him as lazy and rebellious. He was always getting in fights. The Chinese students at this school, they had a rivalry with some students at another school across town that was filled with mostly British students. And they would taunt each other, basically. And it would often result in these big, vicious fist fights where the police had to be called in to break things up. Like, Bruce Lee was a little punk kid. Like, he was a troublemaker. And by this time,
it gets into fights between like the Jets and is it the Sharks?
Yeah. They just start snapping on the way.
Well, that happens in this movie too. You see some guys snap, and there's even at one point Steiner like snaps and gives some metal fingers.
Yeah,
you shouldn't have done that. Snap metal fingers. And you're like, shit's going down.
Yeah, this guy means business. So, but fighting had become a major part of Bruce's life at this point, and he realized that in these fights, when he gets in these fights, he's always got his gang behind his back, and they've always got like chairs and shit that they can use as weapons. But he's like, well, what happens if somebody corners me? What if I'm left alone and I don't have my gang to back me up? So kind of thinking about this, he decided he needed to be trained in martial arts. And his parents agreed, because his parents thought that training in martial arts would give him some much needed discipline.
But for my days of teaching martial arts, that was you get brought the troublemakers of like, hey, you deal with them. Like,
that's why so many karate studios around here say like, we teach Christian principles. It's like, but we teach people to hit each other too, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the only class where when the student acts up, it's like considered like part of the curriculum that they get kicked in the face. So that's why it works so well.
At the age of 13, Bruce began training in Wing Chun, a type of kung fu. He was being trained under a guy named William Chung, and he took to it immediately. He was really good pretty much right away. He made progress insanely fast. He was basically, he was a natural. Like, it just came naturally to him.
Just like an Asian.
Well, Jesus Christ.
It's not me this week. I haven't done this yet.
I think part of it was because Bruce was a trained dancer as well. That doesn't get mentioned a lot when his biographies come up, but he was a trained dancer. He won dance contests. Like, he was, he was a trained dancer. So I think a lot of those moves and his fighting style that he ends up later on developing has a lot of very dance-like techniques.
Some of the best footwork ever.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Which he got got from Muhammad Ali. He was so good though that his teacher William Chung introduced him to his master, which was the legendary martial artist Yip Man. We all have heard of Yip Man or Ip Man, depending on the spelling that you see. I'm sure you've seen the movies with Donnie Yen about his life.
Wild.
They're super fun.
Yeah, those are awesome.
Yip Man at this point
if you're not into martial arts, you got to see Ip Man.
Yeah,
or Ip Man, if you want to be classy like Justin. But.
Well, that's how they pronounce it. So
besides like being badass fighting movies, they're also like just really well made, and
they are.
Kind of it's dramatized, but it's kind of a nice little slice of martial arts history.
Yeah, the Grandmaster's another one about him that from not connected to that franchise, but that I would highly recommend checking out.
Nice.
Yip Man did not normally train. He didn't train a lot of people directly at this point. He was older in his life at this point. And Bruce became one of the few students to train privately with him. That's how good he was. So when Bruce had begun training, he mostly just wanted to learn how to win a street fight. Like that's what his motivation was initially. But training with Yip Man, he was taught not only the physical aspects of the martial arts, but of the emotional and philosophical ones as well, like controlling your anger, your controlling your breathing, things like this, that would stick with Lee through his entire life. But despite his training, he continued to be a troublemaker, and he was eventually expelled from school and forced to transfer to another school across town. So at this new school, he's still getting in trouble, you know, and one of his teachers encouraged him to redirect his energy by entering into the boxing championships there in Hong Kong. There was actually a boxing tournament that was being held between his new school and the British boys' school that he had rivalries with in the past. So they had a boxing championship, not martial arts, just kind of American style boxing. So he liked the idea. He trained for it, and then he goes in and he breezes through the preliminary rounds, beats everyone pretty easily. And he did this by using blocking techniques that he had learned from Yip Man. And then he gets in the championship fight. He's fighting a guy who's won like the last 3 years in a row, reigning champion, and beats him like it's nothing.
Yeah, like some of those, especially Wing Chun inspired blocking techniques, you know, for you know, Queen's rules boxing, it's more about just cover, right, as opposed to actively having an active defense and actually blocking. So if you can actually do that and counter, you're untouchable, which, you know,
which he absolutely was.
Which he absolutely was. Yeah.
But Bruce is still getting into street fights, despite, you know, that he was able to kind of redirect this into an actual sport. He's still getting in trouble outside of this. So his mother decided that he needed to get away from the bad influence of his friends, this gang of friends that he was hanging out with, and suggested that he go to America, because remember, he was born in America. So if he goes to America and claims his citizenship before he turns 18, he can be an American citizen. So he's 17 years old at this point. He's got to go. So he takes a 3-week trip on a boat across the ocean, comes to America, and moves in with a family friend. His father, of course, was around still as well, but his father agreed that he should go to America because his prospects in Hong Kong were grim. Like, he didn't think he'd be able to get into college and have a promising future if he kept getting in trouble the way that he was. So he moves back to America. He moves to Seattle, 1959, enrolls in a high school there, and then
starts drinking coffee, listening to
Nirvana.
A
lot of grunge.
Yeah.
So
wearing plaid.
Seattle had an Asian culture day while he was in high school there. And when they did this, some of his teachers asked him to give a kung fu demonstration in front of the school. So he did. And one person that was in the audience that day was a guy named James DeMille. James DeMille was a former U.S. Army heavyweight boxing champion. So Bruce is looking around. Bruce sees and recognizes James DeMille in the audience and asks him to come up and join the demonstration. So DeMille walks up, sees this, 5'8" Chinese guy, kind of small guy, and DeMille's a big hulking dude. He's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to easily beat this guy. Is not able to land a single blow. Not a single blow touches Bruce Lee at all. So after the demonstration, DeMille asked Lee he wants him to show him some moves and teach him some of his moves. And so this 17-year-old kid is teaching a world champion stuff that he doesn't know, right? Yeah. And that led into Bruce Lee teaching martial arts. And he soon had a pretty devoted group of students at a very young age. So after he graduated high school, he goes to college at the University of Washington. He did actually, while he was in Seattle in high school, we should say, he did start to actually focus on his academics and got better and graduated with a pretty good GPA, was able to get into college. Goes to the University of Washington, where he was a drama major because he still had aspirations of being a movie star because, he'd been in movies as a kid. He often says, if you look in interviews with Bruce Lee, he says that he majored in philosophy, which is not true. He did not major in philosophy. It's just part of the legend that he created about himself. But there are documents saying that he did major in drama, although he didn't graduate. He ends up dropping out of college here in a bit. But he continues his martial arts training while he's in school, pulling what he'd learned from Wing Chun, but also adding in elements of other forms of fighting. And he sort of is starting to develop his own distinctive fighting style. And he ends up dropping out of school and opening his own martial arts school at the age of 22. And it was around this time, he's 22 years old, and he meets another student, someone that he had met there at the university named Linda Emery. So in 1964, Bruce is invited to give another demonstration, this time at the Long Beach International Karate Championships. And it was there. You can find this footage online of him fighting. He's fighting in full pads, because another thing Bruce didn't like about a lot of karate championships was this idea of a point system based on, somebody would have won that fight,
Right.
Whereas Bruce was like, a fight is contact.
Yeah.
So he did a demonstration with full contact. They're both wearing pads and stuff. And he was one of the first martial arts trainers to do that, to wear boxing pads and things and helmets during spars. You can go on YouTube. You can find this demonstration of him fighting in all these pads. You can also find images of him demonstrating his famous 2-finger push-ups and the 1-inch punch, which is where he is able to
1-inch punch.
It's where he's literally able to stand an inch from somebody and he knocks a guy 6 feet away. Yeah. It's pretty wild. The 1-inch punch, coincidentally, is also the name that Gary's wife has given to his technique in bed.
Nice.
I like that one. That was good.
Oh, that was a good one.
Dude, I was sitting out letting you just tell the story and you brought me back in. You son of a bitch. That was a good one. I'll give you that one.
So it was also at this championship in Long Beach where Bruce met a Filipino martial artist by the name of Dan Inosanto, who would later become Bruce's #1 student.
Also his best friend, by the way. You're going to see him later.
He's going to pop up
more
again.
about him. But he kind of carries Bruce's legacy. Has probably helped keep a lot of it surviving.
Yeah. So not long after this championship, this is in the summer of 64, in August of 64, Linda, Bruce at this point has moved to California, but Linda, his girlfriend, is still living in Seattle. And she writes to him saying that she's pregnant. And the two end up getting married. And then Bruce so she moves back down with him in California. And the two of them move in with a man named James Lee, who's a traditionally trained kung fu fighter. And then him and Bruce kind of work on this new, opening up a new martial arts studio, because James Lee was also interested in kind of helping to create a new type of martial arts technique, and saw that what Bruce was doing was a good path towards that. And another thing that they really wanted to do, which was frowned upon in most Chinese martial arts, is they wanted to teach anyone who had a serious interest in learning to fight, not just Chinese people. So what this leads to is
that's kind of like with Ip Man. A lot of those martial arts didn't get taught to anyone outside their clan or outside their temple.
Right.
It was very, very exclusive. So to not only teach someone outside the clan or outside the family, outside the temple, but to teach someone from a completely different race, culture.
Yeah.
I skipped very, very taboo.
I skipped this detail before, but Ip Man, when Bruce was presented to him as a possible student, he actually there was some resistance to training Bruce, because Bruce Lee is a quarter German. His mother's half German. So he was considered of Eurasian ancestry. And he would often get teased in martial arts classes by other students who didn't want to spar with him because he was a quarter German. So in 1965, a martial artist by the name of Wong Jackman got word that Bruce was teaching Chinese martial arts, considered sacred, secret arts, to Westerners, and it pissed him off. He was mad about it. So he challenged Bruce to a fight. The loser would have to close their school. That's what the fight was. So they get there. They go to have the fight, and when I don't think he expected Bruce to actually show up for it, but Bruce did. He accepted it, and then Wong Jackman says, "Okay, but there's some rules, like no hitting in the groin, things like this." And Bruce is like, "Fuck that! Like, you challenged me to a fight, we're gonna fight. No rules, no holds barred." So they fight, and Bruce won pretty easily. Like Wong was like running away from him after he got hit a couple times, and Bruce just chases him and punches him in the back of the head. And then Wong's like students drag him away, and that was it. There was no like
Sounds
finishing
about right.
blow. Yeah, but the match was sloppy, and Bruce was not happy with how it went, because he wasn't happy with his performance because it was kind of sloppy, and he was annoyed that he had become winded during the match. So that kind of prompted Bruce to begin an intense physical training regimen that would continue for his entire life. I mean, Bruce Lee at one point was known as the fittest man alive, and if you watch him on screen, you can absolutely understand why.
Yeah.
To be fair to Wong Jackman, he did say that fight went like 30 minutes or something, and he concluded Lee had lost by basically. Like there was no real end to it or something. He had a whole other story he told later, but
Yeah,
I just want to establish that.
But a lot of other people who were there have different versions of that fight than Wong does.
It's kind of the legendary fight. So you kind of have to cobble together all the stories of people who were
there's a
there,
story.
There's no photos, there's no film, there's no nothing.
This guy Matthew Polly, who wrote Bruce Lee Alive, he has like several different accounts of it and like everything you could find on it. But he said that mainly there was a guy named David Chin there. I don't know, this is probably deeper than we wanted to go on this, but the guy David Chin, he basically said that he arranged the fight for Wong Jack Man. And when Bruce Lee showed up, Wong was his friend, but he even said Lee overwhelmed him in like the first few minutes. Like he didn't know what to do with him. Yeah, just Wong told him privately that he regretted fighting Bruce Lee. And
I bet.
He said he said that he concluded they were both being arrogant, is what Wong Jackman said.
Well, we're
just arrogant.
Yeah, I mean, they were both being arrogant. And there's you can say a lot of great things about Bruce Lee, but one thing that is 100% true is that he was arrogant. But the thing is, he kind of had every right to be. He was the best.
You're Bruce Lee.
Yeah,
right.
You can be arrogant when you are like, I know people talk about like how he was portrayed in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as being like super arrogant. But it's like Bruce Lee was arrogant. Like, I mean, that wasn't the only, there were other aspects of him. He was a very warm and loving person and seemed to be fun to be around. But yes, he was arrogant because,
well, to quote the great philosophers, I mean, one of them at least, Kid Rock, he once said, "They say I'm cocky, and I say what? It ain't bragging, motherfucker, if you can back it up."
That's there you go. Did you just have that quote in your head, or did you have that?
Remember that song?
I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
Nice.
So
but yeah, I think largely people think of Bruce Lee from the clips of him regurgitating some philosophy with Howard Cosell and just and stuff like that. So they get this image of this almost enlightened being. It's like, no, he was a dude, he was a guy. And like when you get the reputation and you can back it up, like Gary just said, of being
like Kid Rock just said,
Kid Rock said.
Yeah, I was quoting the great Kid Rock. I almost said the late great, but I think he's still around.
Who cares?
But when it comes to light that you're clearly one of the baddest men on the planet, like some of that's going to go to your head. He wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't some.
He was also really good, really quickly.
Yeah,
So February 1st, 1965, Linda gives birth to her and Bruce's son, Brandon. And just a few days later, Bruce had his first Hollywood screen test. So Jay Sebring, hairstylist to the stars. You might know the name of Jay Sebring. He was, of course, a future Manson family murder victim. He was in the Polanski house when Sharon Tate was killed.
Oh, wow.
He had been at the Long Beach tournament where Bruce had demonstrated his 1-inch punch and had mentioned him to a producer named William Dozier. William Dozier is the guy who is behind Batman, the 60s Batman series.
Yeah.
But Dozier was working on a TV show about Lee Chan, the son of Charlie Chan, the famous detective. So while that show never came to be, Dozier had seen potential in Lee and cast him in another of his shows that he was working on, which was The Green Hornet. And that show was not a major success. But the Green Hornet and Lee's character Kato did introduce most Western audiences to Kung Fu for the first time. This is something that we had not seen. I mean, most Asian movies that had come stateside at this point were wuxia movies or samurai movies, things like that, not the kind of Kung Fu that Bruce Lee was known for. So the Green Hornet only lasted a single season before being canceled because it's not very good. No. And a lot of people just saw it as being trying to be Batman, which is exactly what it was doing.
Oh yeah.
But after its cancellation, Lee, he couldn't really get any other roles, so he recommitted himself to teaching martial arts and turned his techniques into a new form of Kung Fu called Jeet Kune Do, which is the way of the intercepting fist.
To be honest, like if there's anyone who's sort of into martial arts or the idea of, the philosophy behind Bruce Lee, do yourself a favor, go find a copy of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do.
Own a copy.
Amazon. I've got a copy. It is fascinating because like we've been talking about, there's a lot of in short, he was able to take the Venn diagram of all these different all these different fighting styles, be it traditional martial arts, boxing, fencing, and find where they intersect and focus on that. And it's really fascinating reading.
Well, and what you're talking about there, Todd, is one of the things that's like what part of Bruce Lee's legacy, I think, which would be that, I mean, even guys like Dana White of the UFC say this, that Bruce Lee is the godfather of MMA, like modern MMA.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he was MMA
because
before MMA was a thing.
Yeah.
Right, because what he's doing with Jeet Kune Do is he's using stuff he learned in Wing Chun. He's using stuff he learned even in dance, in boxing. Like I said, that footwork that he does, he will tell you like he got that from Muhammad Ali. You know, like he's taking elements from all these different styles and turning them into their own thing. And the very definition of what he saw Jeet Kune Do as, which we will get into when we start talking about Game of Death, because it's so integral to that movie, is using all these different techniques.
Well, I love that about it. That
used.
MMA thing, I feel like comes up during the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar fight. Yeah. And when he starts going into chokes and that sort of thing. But anyway, that James DeMille, I forget how we pronounce it, but the boxer that he ends up training becomes one of his friends. Bruce kept like his same close group of friends that he taught, and like it was interesting. He had a circle.
Well, but, and like people, I mean, you'll see people that he started training and meeting back in the late 60s and early 70s. They will appear in his movies. You know, he keeps them around him.
DeMille ended up writing a book called Disciples of the Dragon. And in that, he talks about Jeet Kune Do as like that was something he developed like as while he and Bruce were friends. Like Bruce was realizing like, all right, now I'm teaching Westerners Wing Chun. He said that he actually had the conversation with them, like as they get better at this, well, they're bigger and stronger than me. So like, he's like, I've got to think of outside the box even more and a way to mix things up, because he felt like people rely too much on their styles. Like they get like hung up on it, and then that's all they do. And Bruce Lee said, well, to be the ultimate, no pun intended, but the ultimate fighter, like you would start to mix these things up and, be able to flow seamlessly between them.
Well, I saw that a lot in, in my limited experience teaching one style was, as a student progresses in those early stages, they all kind of look the same. They're all doing the same techniques the exact same way. But at some point, the artistry comes into play, and, the personal style starts to come to the surface. And you realize folks that have really long reaching legs end up utilizing those a little bit more. Folks that are sort of, a little bit stockier, use their weight, use their power more. If you've got, someone who's shorter, they're a little bit more evasive. And, it's always interesting to see students branch off in that way, but, it's kind of funny that he's teaching Westerners who are bigger, stronger. And so he's got to stay on top. So he has to find another avenue around. That's kind of where the personal journey and personal discovery in terms of martial arts comes in.
So Bruce soon opens a new school in downtown Los Angeles. He doesn't really close his other school back in Oakland, but he lets one of his students take it over, and so that the students who are learning there can keep learning there. He goes to Los Angeles, and it was there that he amassed a group of celebrity students that included like Roman Polanski, Stephen McQueen, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He also trained not only actors, like Hollywood actors, but established martial arts masters like Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and Mike Stone. Those three dudes at the time, and I know Chuck Norris is like a meme now, but he was a badass I say martial arts before he ever got into movies. Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and Mike Stone, between the three of them, had won every major martial arts championship in North America. Yeah. Like these guys are badasses, and they're going to Bruce Lee to learn how to get better.
Yeah, he gets sought out to like teach, just technique and stuff like that. Now, I've read some that, he also pulled from Chuck Norris, some things, like as far as learning some technique and that sort of thing. So they were kind of trading off, but they would want to spar together and learn more about fighting. And so, yeah, you got a good rep if the baddest motherfuckers on the planet want to come to you to get better at being the baddest motherfuckers on the planet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a few weeks after the birth of his second child, Shannon, in 1969, Bruce suffered a pretty severe back injury while lifting weights. And he was told that he'd never be able to do, he's like, forget about Kung Fu. You're not going to be able to kick anymore. And of course, Bruce is anything but a quitter. But he did spend 6 months on his back recuperating and fell into like a deep depression. But after that 6 months, he started training again. He got back to his old self, although that back injury would secretly plague him for the rest of his life. Also in 1969, he was the karate advisor on a movie called The Wrecking Crew, which starred Dean Martin and Sharon Tate. This is the movie that we see Tate watching in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in the movie theater scene. Chuck Norris is also in The Wrecking Crew. It's his first credited film role. He's got a small role in that as well. And then a year after that, he was the fight choreographer for a movie called A Walk in Spring Rain, starring Ingrid Bergman and Anthony Quinn. So he's working behind the scenes on movies, and he's occasionally appearing on screen, either in small roles, like he played a nameless hoodlum in the 1969 film Marlowe. He was in 4 episodes of the TV series Longstreet in 1971, but he wasn't happy appearing in these just kind of small supporting roles. Like he saw himself as, like we said, he's arrogant. He sees himself as like a movie star, right? So when producer Fred Weintraub suggested, who was an executive producer on The Green Hornet and stuff that he'd worked on before, when he suggested that Bruce go to Hong Kong to make a feature film that would get the attention of Hollywood executives, that's what he did. So he goes to Hong Kong.
Now, the thing is that I want to say too, I mean, we call it arrogance, but another part of Bruce Lee too is that he is, and this is probably like a discussion for like when we do a Bruce Lee series, which I am on board for, but is that he's also, he cares about his culture. He cares about Chinese people. And, and so at this time in cinema, they're largely just, I've seen it described as like, I think he thought of them as like sexless, like secondary figures, just out there. Like they just don't matter. Like, as lead
no
characters.
Tiki, no shirty.
Yeah, they're just memes of who Chinese people are. And so all of this. So part of it for him too was a chip on his shoulder about, I want to give recognition to who we are as a culture.
Right. And what he didn't know when he went to Hong Kong is that the Green Hornet, so it had been showing on movie theater screens there and had been incredibly popular in Hong Kong and had been unofficially referred to as the Kato show. In Hong Kong, like Bruce Lee was considered the star of the show. And when he got off the plane, like it was a big deal. It's like a movie star had arrived, right?
When those international countries like latch onto a star, man, they go all in, man.
Yeah. And that surprising success led Lee to negotiating a contract with 2 of the major studios there in Hong Kong. One was the legendary Shaw Brothers studio, and one was Golden Harvest. He eventually would sign with Golden Harvest because the Shaw Brothers studio is more of like an assembly line, and they were not offering him very much money because that's kind of what they did. We'll talk more about the Shaw Brothers in a week or two. But he signs with Golden Harvest, and his contract is for 2 movies. The first of which is The Big Boss in 1971. It's a big success in Asia. It's a big success over there, and it made him a star in Hong Kong, right? He follows it up with The Fist of Fury in 1972, which proved to be an even bigger success. It broke box office records that had been set by The Big Boss the year before. So practically overnight, Bruce Lee has become a superstar. Comes out of nowhere. Literally steps off a plane and becomes a movie star.
Yeah, it's wild.
Well, you're starting to find out. I mean, like now it seems crazy, but like now China's a huge market. Like China's as big as Hollywood or, the US as far as box office receipts,
Oh yeah.
So, but at this time, I don't think the US really recognized what was popular in China. They weren't getting, there wasn't the crossover yet until, well, you could argue Bruce Lee, like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, largely due to Bruce Lee.
So after these 2 movies are done, his contract with Golden Harvest has been fulfilled. He comes back to the U.S. and gets excited about developing this new TV series called The Warrior, which is about a Chinese Shaolin monk traveling the American West. But he did not get the role because he was considered too Chinese to play a Chinese monk.
So you can see Bruce Lee here. You can find that obviously most of his issues with race were unfounded. Everything was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what apparently what it was, according to the executives working on it, was
I think
his
one of the
accent.
executives had issues with his dirty knees. I think was a quote that I saw somewhere.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
Lord.
that's awkward.
Yeah, you should-
Specific,
yeah.
very specific.
But and eventually a very similar sounding show called Kung Fu was released, and there were some lawsuits regarding that. I won't get into that too much, but in that one, but it's basically the exact same plot. Although they say that they had been developing this well before The Warrior, and it was a coincidence, which is bullshit.
Yeah.
But Kung Fu, if you're not familiar with it, was a TV show in the 70s, which starred an American actor by the name of David Carradine, who of course is Bill in Kill Bill. So it's all connected here.
It's all connected. Also, interestingly enough, David Carradine had unique techniques for other things as well.
We're not going to get into it. You saved those jokes for our Kill Bill episode.
Sorry.
He did not have dirty knees. I don't think the rope let his knees hit the ground.
Oh my God. Well, that's it. We're canceled.
All right.
So after this project kind of falls apart, he goes back to Hong Kong, starts renegotiating a contract with Golden Harvest because his last two movies with them were incredibly successful, and that gave him a lot of negotiating power. So when he re-signed with Golden Harvest, they agreed to give him complete control on his next film. So on his next film, The Way of the Dragon, Lee had full control of the production, not only as the star, but as the writer, director, fight choreographer. He helped scout locations. He played the bongos on the score. Like, he did everything in this movie.
Now I saw that because he had that much control, he was asking for some really, really weird things. Like he insisted on putting urine in everyone's Coca-Cola, and I thought that was a little far to go.
You used to be worried about me, Justin, but now it is
I'm no
clearly
longer
the
worried about
shoe.
you.
The shoe has moved to another
absolute
foot.
power corrupts absolutely, and I think for him to request such a thing is very
Cancel culture gonna get you, Todd.
I was about to say the only way to combat racism
is at
Mr. Todd A. Davis on
At
everything.
Mr.
Come at
Todd A.
me.
Davis on Twitter.
Come at me.
Not for long. He's not.
Oh man. So, and you have to realize how fast this is all happening for Bruce Lee. In 1964, he dropped out of college. By 1972, he's the biggest martial arts star in the world, on the cusp of being an international superstar.
Man.
In August of 1972, he began filming what was to be his fourth film for Golden Harvest, Game of Death, a film that he was once again set to write and direct. And Game of Death basically came about kind of by accident. So he planned to take a little bit of time off because he had a very grueling schedule for the last 2 years. And then he found out that his former student, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, was going to be in Hong Kong. And when he found out Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was coming, he's like, I want to shoot some fight scenes. So he kind of quickly set this thing up, and he set up these fight sequences, hoping to turn them into the climax of his new feature that he wanted to work on. So, and I will go on a little side note, because I thought about this as I was writing notes on this. I was like, are some of our younger listeners going to know who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar when we talk about him as if you should know who he is?
Right.
For those who don't know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, if you've seen the movie, you've seen him. He's the enormous black man at the end. He's 7'2". He's a professional basketball player. He's a professional basketball legend. He played for 20 seasons in the NBA, most notably. He played from 1969 to 1989. He was 42 when he retired, mostly with the LA Lakers. He won 6 national championships as a player. He later won 2 more as an assistant coach. By the time he retired in '89, he was the NBA's all-time leader in points scored, minutes played, field goals made, block shots, defensive rebounds, and career wins. Now, by the time he started filming his scenes for Game of Death, he was still relatively new. He was 2.5, about 3 seasons into his career. But even then, he was already a major star. He'd already won Rookie of the Year in 1970 while playing for the Milwaukee Bucks. And then he led the Bucks to their first NBA championship in 1971. And the reason I say all this is because I want you to understand that having Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in your movie was going to be a big deal. This guy is a major star. He is incredibly well known in 1972. So it wasn't just some random dude that happened to be a tall guy that was Lee's student. He was a box office draw, potentially.
Interesting. There's I will give him this. I mean, there's something about his presence that's very cool.
His legs are as tall as Bruce Lee's entire body. So that's
that is very true.
So here is the sort of plot to Bruce Lee's Game of Death. So Lee plays the role of a character named Hai Tien, who's a retired martial arts champion who's confronted by a Korean gang who tell him the story of this pagoda called the Paosengjan. And this is a place where guns are prohibited and where highly skilled martial artists are protecting something valuable in its top level. It's never really revealed in any of the information found about this, what that thing might be. I don't know if Bruce had, it's a MacGuffin for all intents and purposes. I don't know if Bruce had even worked out what it was going to be yet, but there's something at the top of this pagoda that all these guys are protecting that he has to get to. So the gang's boss wants him to retrieve this item and he refuses. And when he refuses, his younger brother and sister are kidnapped, which kind of forces him to participate. So the setting of the pagoda is this temple in South Korea called the Beopjusa Temple. It's a Buddhist temple. And at the base of the pagoda, it's not just him, it's him and a group of 4 other guys. And they have to fight 10 people, all black belts in karate, before they even get in, right? Inside, they encounter a different opponent on each floor, each person that they encounter a bigger challenge than the last, and each with a different fighting style. That is very important to what Bruce Lee was trying to do with this movie. So his group defeats a kicking master. They defeat a guy who is a master in the praying mantis style of Kung Fu. And then Lee has to fight Filipino Eskrima master Dan Inosanto, who we talked about before, being one of Lee's former students. And then he has to defeat a Korean Hapkido master named Jin Han Jae. And then finally, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who fights with a sort of styleless style, is what they
sort of similar to what Bruce Lee's like going for.
Exactly. Exactly. So so he's got this formless style, and that's kind of the final boss, if you will. And his character, because he's so big and because he's got such an unpredictable style, he can only be defeated once Hai recognizes that he has an unusually high sensitivity to light, hence the sunglasses that he's wearing when we see him in the scene. Now, this has all been culled from documents that were found later on. In truth, when he began filming, like I said, it was kind of on the fly, and he did not have a script. There was not a script to this movie. So it's not like somebody found a script. These are just notes that were found.
Well, watch I've seen the movie twice here in the past few days. And there's clearly moments in the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar fight where he gets thrown into the window and busts out the window.
Yes.
And you can tell that's like significant for some reason, but then they totally just drop it. And then, so Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's got like on his shades the whole time.
Yeah.
But that there's a reason for that. Yeah, he's always supposed to be in the dark and that sort of thing. So there's obviously like moments in the fight that are just completely, and workarounds that are being filmed because it's just, we'll get into it.
Did anyone ever like take those notes and actually like put together even an animated, hey, here's what Game of Death was supposed to be type thing?
No, but we will get into some additional footage that has been put together that I actually watched last night. And we'll get into that in a minute. But there is more that exists of this fight, of this entire sequence than what you see in the film.
Well, it's worth mentioning that I got a lot from I watched an audio commentary on the Shout Factory DVD from Mike Leader, who's an Asian film expert, and
that commentary is on the Criterion release as well.
Okay, yeah, so that it's pretty good, and he goes. I mean, he goes. I'll never try to capture everything he talks about because he gives you details about every single location. All of those things. He's very good. It's a very good commentary if you want information about the movie. But yeah, he mentions in there that he's seen stuff that says there was like 100 minutes of footage.
I've seen that as well. I've seen that as well, but apparently a lot of that footage was just multiple takes because Lee was such a perfectionist that he would often do things over and over. Now there is, because I watched it, I can tell you that of completed footage that you could stitch together into a sequence, it's almost 40 minutes of film.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. And so that's where he goes in. And I know you we'll probably talk about it in a minute where you can catch some of that. But anyway.
So this plot, though, that we just described, obviously, if you've watched this movie with us, you know that that does not resemble the finished product at all. They only shot complete scenes for the last 3 floors, which was the Temple of the Tiger, which is where Lee fights Inosanto, the Temple of the Dragon, where he fought Jihage, and then the Temple of the Unknown, which is where he fights Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then, so there was a Hapkido master by the name of Huang In-Sheik. He was supposed to play the Guardian on the first floor, and then Bruce's longtime student, Taki Kimura, who actually is the guy who took over his school in Oakland when he moved to LA. Kimura was supposed to play the Guardian on the second floor, who fights in the Praying Mantis style, but those scenes never got shot. But Bruce Lee's intention for Game of Death was to be a film that truly showcased not only his martial arts techniques, but his martial arts philosophies. So in the film, as each martial artist is defeated, the flaws in their fighting styles are revealed. So Dan Inosanto's character, for instance, relies heavily on fixed patterns of offensive and defensive technique, something that Lee's Jeet Kune Do style specifically tried to break away from. In some of the footage that was cut from this, Lee's character actually says, like, you can't rely on a routine. Like, if you're doing a routine, like he's kind of trash talking the guy while he's fighting him. He's like, if you're doing a routine, it's very easy for me to predict, So, which is, and Jeet Kune Do was very much against the idea of having a set routine, a set list of moves that you're supposed to hit one after another. So Lee in the movie, in the original movie, Lee defeats all of his opponents by having a fighting style that involves fluidity, unpredictability, and a blend of different techniques. So production on Game of Death stopped in November of 1972 when Lee got the phone call that he'd been waiting for his entire career. And that's Warner Brothers, Hollywood comes calling and wants to make a movie with him. They give him the opportunity to star in Enter the Dragon, which is the first film to be produced jointly between a major Hollywood studio and a Hong Kong studio. So Enter the Dragon, it's directed by Robert Klaus. It was filmed between February 1973 and April 1973 with a planned release date of July 26th of that year. And the physical demands on Bruce during the filming of Enter the Dragon, not to mention the fact that he'd been going nonstop for 2 years with very little time to rest, it took a toll on his body. Like, it said that, he was looking pale and he was looking gaunt. Like, he looks very in shape in the movie, but if you compare him to, let's say, Way of the Dragon, his previous movie, he does physically look skinnier in Enter the Dragon.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's lean to start with, but there's a couple shots where it's like, oh dude, he's really skinny.
But on May 10th of that year, 1973, he was recording ADR for Enter the Dragon, and they had cut off the air conditioning so that it wouldn't be picked up by the mics. So it's very warm in the room as well. And Lee goes to the bathroom, takes a break, and he collapses. And he's suffering from seizures and headaches. He's immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with a condition called cerebral edema, which is where excess fluid accumulates around the brain. So cut to a couple months later, July 20th that year, Lee is in Hong Kong to have dinner with one-time James Bond, literally one-time James Bond, George Lazenby, because Lazenby was actually another one of his famous students, and he had hoped that Lazenby would appear in Game of Death once shooting on that film resumed. Later in the evening, he goes to the home of Betty Ting Pai, which is a Taiwanese actress, another actress that he was wanting to talk to about being in Game of Death. And they're supposed to have dinner later that evening with Raymond Chow, the head of Golden Harvest, to talk about Game of Death. And so he goes over to her house and he complains of a headache. So Ting gives him a painkiller called Equagesic. I think I'm saying that correct. I don't know. Equagesic. It's a combination drug that contains aspirin and a tranquilizer. Ooh. So around 7:30 that evening, before their dinner reservations, he goes to lie down for a nap. And when Lee didn't arrive at dinner, Raymond Chow comes by Ting's apartment looking for him, but they can't wake Lee up. So they brought a doctor in to check on him. The doctor spent 10 minutes unsuccessfully trying to revive Lee before sending him by ambulance to the hospital. And Lee was declared dead on arrival at the age of only 32 years old, and just 6 days before the release of Enter the Dragon. Jeez. Now, we got into this a lot on our Enter the Dragon episode, but there are a lot of theories on what possibly caused Lee to die that day.
It's a demon.
Yeah, it was the demon from the movie.
Yeah, from Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. It was a demon. It looks like a samurai.
I think the most
that whole story sounds very Heath Ledger.
Yeah, I mean, Heath Ledger was abusing. He was abusing sleeping pills.
He was mixing a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Bruce was not. This was like a one-time thing. He did take painkillers for his back, but he wasn't, by any accounts that I've read, abusing them.
This is an unfortunate thing, or maybe he was. I mean, he was. It sounds like he was overworking himself too. But
it sounds like he was overworking himself. There are a lot of people that say that he died of an allergic reaction brought on by the painkiller. That's the most commonly accepted version of what killed him. Matthew Polly, in the book that you were mentioning, Gary, he theorized that his cerebral edema was caused by overexertion and a heat stroke. Because at the time, in the late 70s, heat stroke wasn't a condition that was very well understood. And Polly also says that Lee had apparently had his sweat glands under his arm and his armpits removed because he didn't like the way that it looked on screen. And if that's true, then
he's not like expelling the heat.
Yeah, so he very, very easily could get heat stroke.
Yeah.
So, but it'll always be a mystery, ultimately.
Unless you watch Dragon, the Bruce Lee story.
Then you know the true story.
There you go.
Right.
Wasn't there someone who theorized, or a rumor or whatever going around that he was poisoned? That it was
that was a rumor I saw, the gang activity or something, which
still wasn't cool with him teaching to Westerners. And
there's a lot of theories about the curse of the Lee family, which I think that's something we can get into later, and we could probably get into that if we talk about The Crow one day.
Yeah,
because I think that would be an interesting thing to talk about then. But it's all theory, so but it's an interesting story to look into. When Enter the Dragon was released on July 26, 1973, it made Bruce an international star. He had gone from being Hong Kong's most famous martial arts actor to the most famous martial artist in the entire world. But he was dead. So after the success of that movie, a lot of Hong Kong studios were worried that a movie that did not star Bruce Lee wouldn't be financially successful, at least not worldwide. So they decided to play on Lee's sudden international fame by making movies that vaguely sounded like they could be Bruce Lee movies. And then they cast actors who sort of looked like Bruce Lee, sometimes just from certain angles. Sometimes they just had similar haircuts. And then they would change their screen names to variations of Lee's name. Like there was Bruce Lie. There's Bruce Lee, L-I. There's Bruce Lee, L-E. They were probably the two biggest ones. There's
Bruce Leroy.
There's Bruce K.L. Lee, there's Bruce Ty, and then my favorite is Bronson Lee. And yes, he has a mustache.
It's perfect.
And so with these films, the Brucesploitation movie was born. And this is a movement that lasted basically from around 1973 to the early 1980s when Hong Kong had a movie star that could possibly be the next Bruce Lee, and that's Jackie Chan. So he kind of became the next one to sit on that throne. But until then, they were just scrambling to cash in on the Bruce Lee name. Now, one of the films
it's pretty gross, to be honest.
It's very gross.
It's pretty gross.
I absolutely agree. It's very gross.
I say gross on the side of the studios, but I mean, a lot of these actors are just trying to get their names out there, so I don't hold it.
But there's not even their names; they're changing their names.
Yeah, they're just looking for. I don't know. It's disturbing. They could have just done their own. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking of where you're about to go with Game of Death. That's where it gets gross. Yeah, get really gross.
Incoming transmission.
Hey, folks, it's your old friend, Mr. Todd A. Davis from the Cinema Shock podcast, here to ask, are you tired of seeing a random episode of Star Trek and thinking, I wonder where this falls into the overall prime timeline? I know I am. That's why I'm bringing you a new podcast covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. It's called Computer Resume Podcast. Each week, join me and a rotating panel of my family and friends as we boldly talk Trek like no one has before. If there's a joke to be made, we'll make it. And if there's a poignant discussion to be had, well, we'll try our best. We'll also have interviews, contests, take listener questions, and other things currently deemed classified by Section 31. Those shifty motherfuckers. So join us every week starting in January of 2021 for the Computer Resume podcast, free wherever you get your podcasts. And be the first to hit us up online now at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or email us directly at computerresumepodcast@gmail.com. The Computer Resume podcast, part of the Slice of Fried Gold Network. Hashtag LLAP. We'll see you soon.
So one of the movies that could be considered one of the first, if not the first, Brucesploitation movie came from actually an American producer, a guy by the name of Lawrence Joachim. So this is a fun story because Joachim was looking for a hit and he was having a lot of bad luck. He wasn't having a lot of hits. So his 10-year-old son, Marco, suggested to his father that he try to get the rights to the Green Hornet TV series because Enter the Dragon was so big. And they wanted to, he's like, you can get the rights to the Green Hornet TV series and capitalize on Lee's fame. So Joachim goes to Fox, who owned the rights to the series. And then Fox, not thinking that the show was worth anything, because remember, it's only 26 episodes, lasted half a year, and it was a flop. They were like, this is not worth anything. So they gladly sold him the rights to all 26 episodes. And then Marco, this 10-year-old kid, actually takes the footage and edits footage from the TV series. I don't think he used all 26 episodes. I think he used maybe 4 episodes, but he edits it into a 90-minute movie, and it gets released theatrically in 1974 and is a big hit. It becomes the 5th highest grossing Bruce Lee movie of all time. And it was just footage from the Green Hornet that was edited by a 10-year-old. And of course, its success is only serves to legitimize this idea to other studios, especially those in Hong Kong, who saw Bruce Lee and his name and likeness as a way to appeal to a worldwide audience.
So that's where we get this string of 10-year-old editors.
Yeah, that started that whole movement.
Yeah,
Started YouTubing is what it was.
Yeah.
Like live
That's where
streamers.
TikTok began.
Yeah,
There it is.
So with this movement, though, with this Brucesploitation thing, and this is wild. This I went down so many rabbit holes looking into Brucesploitation because it is insanely interesting to me. The Criterion box set has a really great, about 10-minute conversation with Grady Hendrix, the author, about Brucesploitation, because among other things, I guess Grady Hendrix is a Bruce Lee and Brucesploitation expert. But it's fascinating to me because can you name another subgenre of film that was spawned entirely by the death of an actor? Like that's what an insane thing to think about.
Yeah,
Not
that's
yet,
really
but there'll be walksploitation, like Christopher Walksploitation.
I thought you were talking about Paul Walker.
Oh man. That's already the last Fast and Furious movie.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Would be. I would go for, and I mean this with, God bless him, God bless Fast and the Furious, but let's go with somebody with a distinct personality that you would try to exploit.
You mean like Vin Diesel?
Yeah, if Vin Diesel ever dies. Vinsploitation.
It rolls off the tongue.
I'm going to be honest with you. If he ever dies, and that's questionable, because he is godlike, I'll probably be the person that starts that.
So with this movement, this Brucesploitation thing, you had movies like Bruce Lee Against Superman, where Bruce Lee played Kato. Bruce Lee L.I., I should say, plays Kato, which of course Lee's character from the Green Hornet. And then another one, this is actually one that originated in South Korea, because these are not just being made in Hong Kong. These are being made in every Asian country that is making movies. They're all capitalizing on this. They made one called Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave. Woof. Where in the opening sequence, Bruce Lee's grave is struck by lightning, which causes Lee to burst out of his grave. And that's all like in the opening sequence. And then the rest of the movie has nothing to do with Bruce Lee or this particular plot development. But it's got a really cool poster where Bruce Lee is like half out of a grave and seemingly punching a winged demon bat thing. It's really cool. Great. I would hang the poster on my wall.
I was wrong, I guess, about
awesome.
What was like really big exploitive of Bruce Lee. I guess that would really...
Well, that's not the only one where he died, where that was a plot point. There's another one. And this is one that I am probably going to watch later today because I haven't seen it, and I found it streaming on that weird Night Flight streaming app.
Nice.
And it's called The Dragon Lives Again. It was released in 1977, and this movie sees Bruce Lee as a character named Bruce Lee, played by Bruce Leong, or that the stage name Bruce Leong. Bruce Lee dies in this movie and goes to hell. Once he's in hell, first thing he does, sets up a gym to start training people.
Yeah.
Naturally. But then things get serious when he realizes that some of the most evil people in hell are attempting a coup. They're going to take over the underworld. Whoa. And those evil people, the evil people that he has to stop include Dracula, the Godfather, the Exorcist, Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman.
Holy shit.
James Bond. Clint Eastwood, played by a Chinese guy.
What the fuck?
And Emmanuel. The softcore porn. Yeah. And one of their schemes involves sending Emmanuel to have sex with the king of hell in the hopes that he will have a heart attack and die.
I just gotta say that feels like a side episode. Like that should just be like a side,
I'm not
like a
even
bonus
done.
episode.
I'm not even done. Aiding Bruce in his quest to save hell are the famous Chinese folk legend, the one-armed swordsman. Also Kane from the Kung Fu TV series, this time actually played by a Chinese guy. And
David
Popeye
Carradine.
the Sailor Man, who at one point in the film eats his spinach so that he can help Bruce Lee fight a bunch of mummies.
Oh,
So at the
What
end,
is going on here?
at the end, he defeats.
How has Macarathon not worked this into one of their viewings? Holy shit.
At the end of the movie, he defeats these guys, but he still is mad at the King of Hell because the King of Hell has this pole that he shakes and it causes earthquakes. And Bruce Lee doesn't like that. So he tells him, so the King of Hell, after he sees what Bruce has done to Dracula and the Godfather and the Exorcist and everyone, he's scared of Bruce. And he's begging for his life. He's like, you can even have the throne to hell. Like, what do you want? You can have anything. So Bruce asks him to send him back to Earth and put him, bring him back to life, essentially, which he does. And then the movie ends with Bruce Lee ascending to the sky as everyone waves like he's fucking Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz.
Now, you keep saying Bruce Lee, but like, is it like the character is supposed to be Bruce Lee?
The character is supposed to be Bruce Lee.
Wow,
Yes.
that is
Holy
something.
shit.
Yeah. So,
Like,
and a lot of
Can you imagine that? Like, I mean, if somebody just, I don't know, just fucking busted out with.
What's the name of that one again, Justin?
The Dragon Lives Again.
Dragon Lives. I'm fucking writing it down.
So
It's just crazy. Like, if somebody just busted out with like, Paul Walker fights from hell.
yeah, right.
Like, you're just, I don't
So
think
the
anybody
devil-
be cool with that.
There's going to be a race in hell, and like the devil and Hitler and Mussolini and
And it's gonna be like Drive Angry, but
yeah.
But with Paul Walker, a
Well,
CG
Paul
Paul
Walker.
Walker playing Paul Walker.
or Nicolas Cage playing Paul Walker.
Oh
my
yeah,
God.
that's probably it.
That's insane.
It's totally nuts. Anyway, there were like 100 of these movies produced, and a lot of them played. They played on the names of Bruce Lee films as well. Like there was the New Fist of Fury, which was actually directed by Lo Wai, who had done a Fist of Fury and the original Fist of Fury and The Big Boss, both with Bruce Lee. And the New Fist of Fury actually starred Jackie Chan in one of his first starring roles. There was Re-Enter the Dragon. There was Return of the Fist of Fury. There was Exit the Dragon. Like there's all kinds of goofy stuff. There's even one that was less of a Brucesploitation, although it gets linked in, called Enter the Fat Dragon.
I was about to bring this up. I was about to say, like, well, even Sammo
Yeah.
was caught up in this. Like he
Sammo's like Enter the Fat Dragon was like Sammo Hung, he's in this movie for one thing in Game of Death, but he's a martial artist. He's also in Enter the Dragon. He's kind of known as being husky. We'll call him husky, but still moving with, I mean, he's like an amazing martial artist.
he's at the beginning of Enter the Dragon, right? Like he's the first guy.
He's the first guy that he fights, and he's the guy that Carl Miller fights in this one. And he also was the fight choreographer for Game of Death.
Yeah, he was uncredited in this movie. I was going to bring that up, but yeah, he was uncredited in this movie. He like, in my opinion, makes the movie at all watchable.
Yeah. But Sammo did a movie called Enter the Fat Dragon that was sort of more of like a comedy spoof about this like chubby farmer who's obsessed with Bruce Lee, and then he played that character. So he wasn't like playing Bruce Lee, but it was still kind of playing on Bruce Lee's legacy. But yes, a lot of this, like Gary said, is kind of gross. and very exploitative. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
hence the name Brucesploitation. It's cashing in on the likeness of someone who not only died, but died at a tragically young age at like the height of his stardom, like on the cusp of international stardom. But one studio who had avoided getting sucked into this Brucesploitation craze for all these years was Golden Harvest, even though they were sitting on actual new unseen Bruce Lee footage. But they eventually succumbed. They saw all the dollar signs because some of these movies made decent money. Some of them made really good money, and they knew that they had the potential to make a little bit of money. So they created what is possibly the biggest of all Brucesploitation blunders, the 1978 version of Game of Death.
It's sad that like you want there to be like so much more story involved with Game of Death, but really the story here is of how crazy this whole scenario is, that the guy dies in the middle of making it. And we keep referencing Paul Walker, hopefully respectfully, but we keep referencing him. And but that's the most immediate reference I can think of
someone dying in the middle of production.
Yeah. So you're trying to figure out what you can do to salvage a movie out of this scenario. Now with Game of Death, though, I would say there wasn't enough to salvage a movie, probably.
Right.
But they were like, "Fuck it, we gonna do it anyway."
Paul Walker had shot 80% probably of the footage he was supposed to shoot.
Right.
So it was a little bit easier there, and CGI and stuff, which they didn't have back then.
Yeah, I bounced between this was a bad idea and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, they've been able to do that with them. Maybe they should just remake Game of Death and CG
as it was originally intended. Yeah. Do like a little deep fake, like get another martial artist and then deep fake his face.
Right, exactly. So I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'm disrespectful, but that also seems like an option.
Yeah. So Golden Harvest founder Raymond Chow enlisted Enter the Dragon director Robert Klaus to direct the revised version of Game of Death. Now, this version only uses 11 minutes and 7 seconds of the footage from the original film that Lee was shooting. Lee, like we said, he filmed for nearly 2 months. He filmed, I think Gary said, about 100 minutes of footage. But as I mentioned, a lot of that was just alternate takes of the same scenes.
Yeah, like you said, there were a lot of reshoots. But in there's a documentary called Bruce Lee: A Warrior's Journey, and so I'm jumping into that again. But in that, I think they use What did you say? Was it?
I think they use about 23 minutes in
I think that's what I got too. Was it's 23 minutes of usable footage out of it. And there was a rumor that there was 40 something.
Okay, I will go ahead and say I watched. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but they're on that new Criterion release that came out last year, the Bruce Lee's Greatest Hits. One of the special features on Game of Death is a presentation, I'll call it, called Game of Death Redux. And what this is, so they got this guy I apologize, I didn't write down his name, but they got this guy to cull together all the footage and construct a linear narrative from the time that Bruce Lee enters the third floor. And actually not even enter, it starts mid-fight, but through the end. And it's about 35 minutes long. And I watched it last night, and it is coherent. A coherent 35 minutes of him fighting the last three guys, and two of his. Remember, we said that it was intended to where he had four guys with him. Mm-hmm. In the original film, two of those guys would have been killed before reaching the third floor. So he still got two guys with him. So in this version of the film, you see him with nunchucks, right? Those yellow nunchucks.
Yeah.
In the original footage, you see what his two guys are still there with him, and they hand him the nunchucks. And there are some scenes where Bruce is fighting on one floor and one of his other guys is fighting on another floor, and it cuts in between the two. And you see the footage of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar being blinded when Bruce Lee knocks the window out and the sunlight comes in. That's not just theoretical footage. It exists. It's there. And you can watch it if you have that Criterion Blu-ray. You can watch all of that footage. And it's pretty incredible. Those 35 minutes are better than the entirety of what we were given in 1978. Wow. Because it's all the same footage, but it's all of that footage. And this would have been basically an entire third act of a movie at 35 minutes. which is just nonstop kung fu for 35 minutes, just Bruce Lee kicking ass. And there's a lot more dialogue in it. They had to dub it in this because I think the original audio was elements did not exist. So they have somebody dubbing in Bruce Lee's voice, like an impersonator, but they're saying what he's saying on screen. It's not like they're dubbing over something else. And you can see him, like I said, when he fights Dan Inosanto, like he's saying, your routine isn't going to get you anywhere. Like he's talking smack to him and stuff. And it's really, really good. And it almost makes you wish that Golden Harvest had just put out that 35, 40 minutes of footage, instead of trying to cobble together what they cobbled
Like they could have
together.
almost just sold that. Like, here's the last footage presented for Bruce Lee.
People were so desperate to see more Bruce Lee that they would have paid full price for a movie ticket for a 35-minute feature of that footage. I fully believe that.
Yeah, I was going to save this for later, but we're talking about the release of this movie. The anticipation, you got to think this is 5 years after his death. There were the rumors of this footage. There was the discussion about it. I mean, obviously you didn't have like the online community going ape shit for it or something, but it was already a growing thing. The only comparable thing would be, say, like Star Wars fans getting ready for when episode 1 was going to come out.
Right.
Obviously there would also be some disappointment, just like when episode 1 came out.
Similar reactions.
But they were waiting for it, man. You talked about the yellow jumpsuit earlier on. That yellow jumpsuit was famous before this movie came out. Like, there's extra footage with the motorcycle gang that wears those jumpsuits because the images of Bruce Lee had leaked of like him in that yellow jumpsuit. Like, it was a big deal.
Yeah, people were ready for it. So the new plot of this movie revolves around a character named Billy Lowe, which is not obviously the character that he had originally intended to play. And that character in this film is mostly played by a Korean Taekwondo master named Kim Tae-jong. And then in some scenes, a Hong Kong martial arts actor by the name of Yoon Bao. So these two actors, they spend most of the film in disguises, wearing like fake beards or big sunglasses, or they're just in the dark, in order to mask the fact that they don't really look like Bruce Lee at all.
According to that commentary too, I was listening to, they also hired like some random Chinese businessman. There was a whole other story about Japanese that like one of the actors who was supposed to be one of the fights in one of the fight scenes is like a famous martial artist, and he was on the side selling tickets to the location, and he would bring people in and like get the, and until the Golden Harvest like got on his ass about it. So I was thinking about that. But the Chinese Taekwondo expert and Kim Tae-jong.
Kim Tae-jong,
There was him and like you said, Yoon Bao, and there was a Chinese businessman that they hired off the street who kind of similarly was built like Bruce Lee, and they said that nobody even seems to remember what his name was or anything, and they would have him in a lot of those scenes where they just hid him in the shadows and that sort of thing, which is very odd. But anyway, it's worth mentioning that Taekwondo expert Kim Tae-jong, he plays Billy again in Game of Death 2.
Yes,
and
which I watched today.
Yeah, he also is in No Retreat, No Surrender, which introduced the world to Jean-Claude Van Damme. Wow. He plays the spirit of Bruce Lee.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
But the actors, they're in disguises, of course, but then the film will cut into like these brief close-ups of the actual Bruce Lee that were taken from his pre-Enter the Dragon films. And it's very easy to spot these for a variety of reasons, but especially because the film quality is really a lot more poor in the close-ups of Bruce, and then it cuts to like this much crisper picture that was being shot by Robert Klaus. and then in one scene, famously, of course, in Billy Lowe's dressing room, a cutout of Lee's face was taped to the mirror to cover up the stand-in's face, and you can kind of see his body bobbing behind it a little bit. And it's like only that one time, which means that they saw that and they're like, "This is bad. We can't do this anymore." And yet they did not edit it out. And then in one plot development in the film, the Billy Lowe character fakes his death He gets shot. He gets shot in the face in a scene that strangely mirrors the circumstances around how Lee's real life son, Brandon Lee, died on the set of The Crow, which is super weird.
Yeah.
But that fake death leads to his funeral. And Billy Lowe's character is very famous in the film, so a lot of people show up. And they used actual footage of Bruce Lee's funeral for this scene, including a shot of Lee's actual corpse on display. Now, talk about gross and exploitative.
Yeah.
That's cringy.
Wow.
That's the part I'm talking about. Like that's where it gets too much. Like you're like, it's one thing to even show funeral stuff. I guess.
Where you're showing actual mourners who were truly moved by his death, like people crying and wailing because they were actually stricken with grief. And then you're using that as a movie scene, that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very fucked up. Not kind of, it's very fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's insane. And then they like, I saw stuff from like, apparently Bruce Lee's mother was in the audience on the premiere of this movie. And
God,
and then she was like very, very upset by that. And just insanity. Like literally, like you've got this movie where you're like popping in and out of Bruce Lee appearances, and then his fucking corpse is in the movie. Like that's legitimately his dead body like on screen.
Yeah, it's insane line of thinking.
Yeah.
So, and the cast in a lot of this new footage, which again is the majority of the film is new footage, included several actors who had previously appeared in Lee's films. For instance, Robert Wall, who had appeared in both, he was a villain in both Way of the Dragon and in Enter the Dragon. He plays Carl Miller in this film. Now, Robert Wall is a badass.
You lose, Carl Miller.
He is a 9th degree black belt.
Wait, I got this. Can I do this?
Yeah.
Holds 9th degree black belts in both American Tang Soo Do and Chun Kup Do under Chuck Norris. Studied and received 8th degree black belt under the founder of Taekwondo, General Choi. Received black belt in Okinawan Shurin Ryu under Joe Louis in 1966. Received black belt at Okinawa Te under Gordon Doversola in 1963. Received a black belt in judo under Jean LaBelle in 1958. Then earned a black belt in MMA under Jean LaBelle in 1959. He also trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under the Machado brothers and held a black belt there. He basically holds a black belt, and I will fuck your life up if you make me mad.
Well, he also he co-founded a school with Joe Louis, who, as we mentioned before, was a pretty legendary martial artist in his own right. And yeah, Jean LaBelle, we've talked about on the show before, back in our Lethal Weapon episode.
Yeah, I think he just recently passed away, actually.
Yeah. Robert Wall also had a long-standing feud with Steven Seagal. Have you heard about this?
No, but I'm so excited to hear about it.
This public rivalry with Steven Seagal, it provoked a series of challenges between the two, between the late 80s and the early 90s. It started when Steven Seagal, who, as we all know, is a fucking asshole. He starts making disparaging remarks about Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris and guys like that. And then this culminates,
which is right in line with the martial artist philosophy.
Right. Yeah. Just talking shit.
Yeah.
And then this culminates in a couple of articles in a magazine called Black Belt, a martial arts magazine, where he claimed that he would fight to the death anyone who believed they could defeat him. So,
Steve.
So Robert Wall is obviously pissed because he's talking shit about his friends, one of whom is dead, Yeah. And he gathers a group of martial artists to answer that challenge, a group that he called the Dirty Dozen.
Nice.
It included I won't name all the names because you're not going to, unless you're a martial arts enthusiast, you're not going to know any of them. But Jean LaBelle was one of the potential members as well. And this Dirty Dozen, some people in the martial arts community thought that they were kind of overreacting, like there was some controversy around them. And LaBelle ended up withdrawing because he said that the whole thing was kind of hurting him professionally, hurting his actual work. Seagal never accepted the challenge. So he issued the challenge. They were like, yeah, bring it. We've got 12 dudes. Any one of these dudes will fight you. And Seagal never accepted the challenge.
Oh, all of that though, I will say the biggest achievement that Bob Wall probably achieved in his career is he is also the godfather of Freddie Prinze Jr.
Is he?
Yes.
Wow.
So there's that title you could bestow upon him. No, but seriously, Bob Wall's a badass, and he's the only. I mean, he's the only Westerner you're going to see in like most of Bruce Lee's movies. I think he's in 3. He's
counting this one. He's in Way of the Dragon and Enter the Dragon.
Yeah, so he's obviously a badass. Like he's in this movie for 2 of the non-Bruce Lee fight scenes,
right?
And they're the best fight scenes in the movie.
Yes.
Where what is it? He takes in the ring with Sammo and afterwards.
Yeah.
Those are the 2. I would say they're pretty amazing. Actually, they're pretty great fight scenes. So.
Yeah, and then Sammo, of course, had previously starred with Bruce in Enter the Dragon, and as we mentioned before, is the uncredited fight coordinator on Game of Death. And then, in order to maintain continuity with the previously shot footage, both Dan Inosanto and Jihan Jie were given small roles as like enforcers for the gang of villains. So they appear in new footage as well as the older footage. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, though, he refused to participate for the reshoot, so they replaced him with another tall African-American stand-in when they needed, although the guy, you'll notice, never stands up because I imagine whoever he was not as big as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Right.
Well, there's the scene where they're at the cars where Steiner is there, like talking to them and gets Bruce Lee to get out of the car, and he tells the girl not to get out. He's visibly not as tall, but it's the same guy that is the boat dude
in Enter the Dragon.
No,
in this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they asked. I mean, they tried when they were trying to piece this thing together, and they tried to contact Chuck Norris about playing Steiner initially in this movie.
Chuck Norris does appear in it. In the movie.
Yeah, well, so it ended up
that's just footage
Chuck
from
Norris
Way of the
denied
Dragon.
them. They wanted to do Steiner. Hugh O'Brien ends up in that role. But the role they were trying to pitch it to him was to give you a large role, martial arts action, like you're going to get all this stuff. And Chuck was already becoming a martial arts star in the USA at this time, and he turned them down. And they decided, this makes Golden Harvest sound even dirtier, is they decided to go ahead and they were like, well, we're going to use footage from Way of the Dragon.
I mean, they owned it.
Yeah. And it allowed them to credit Chuck Norris, and then they featured him heavily in all the promotional stuff.
Yeah, even though he appears for about 30 seconds in the movie.
Yeah, and this
from
led to
movie.
Chuck Norris like threatening to sue them. And they were trying to credit. They acted like he was a lead in the movie, and he was not. So he threatened like legal action. He said he wanted no part of this, and they were giving him screen credit. But they also approached like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Muhammad Ali,
all guys who had trained with Bruce. Well, not Muhammad, but James Coburn and Steve McQueen.
And they
former students.
They all said that they felt that it exploited Bruce Lee's death, and they were not going to do it.
They were not wrong.
But
same reason Kareem didn't want to do it.
Yeah, these are all people that the pallbearers at his funeral in 1973 were Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Chuck Norris, George Lazenby, Dan Inosanto, and Peter Chin and Taiki Kimura, who's another one of the fighters that carried on that Jeet Kune Do legacy, but and also Bruce Lee's brother. But
Robert Lee, who also cashed in a little bit on Bruce Lee's death because he released an album of Bruce Lee themed folk songs after his death.
Jesus.
Oh my God.
Bruce Lee L.I. was offered the role of Billy Lowe, but declined, saying that he felt that it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
And I think his reasoning was, this was actually Bruce Lee's movie. This wasn't like one of these things I'm doing. That's
where he drew the line.
Yeah, that's where he drew the line.
So Game of Death 78, the soundtrack was provided by longtime James Bond composer John Barry, and at the opening the opening credit sequence of this, very James Bondian.
Very, yeah.
It's a great opening. It's a great
James Bondian.
It's a great opening credit sequence, honestly. You start watching this, you're like, yeah, this is going to be good, and then it gets into the rest of the movie.
And then the movie starts.
The film also featured a couple of Academy Award winners, Dean Jagger and Gig Young. So Dean Jagger, who plays the main bad guy, the very cheerful old guy, who's like the main bad guy.
He enjoys his stuff.
He just doesn't seem mean at all or threatening. He's
Well,
just
you know
kind of a
what's
nice old
funny
man.
is I actually have become a Dean Jagger fan just because I watched White Christmas for the first time this past season, and he plays the Colonel there, and I was thinking I really like that actor, and then here he is again being an old ass.
Of course, he's like 80 years old in this one, but Dean Jagger
Well, you
had
can
been
see
in
it the one time that Bruce Lee gets that Billy Lowe gets his hands on him, and he's like chokes him out very calmly to the ground.
Yeah, doesn't want to hurt him.
I don't want to break this guy.
Yeah, he'd been in the film industry since 1928, and he had won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his role in 12 O'Clock High back in 1949. And then Gig Young, who plays Jim Marshall in the film, he was a 3-time Academy Award nominee. He won the 3rd time for They Shoot Horses, Don't They, in 1969. Young was also a severe alcoholic, and it was affecting his career a lot, which is why he's doing shitty exploitation movies. But his alcoholism had cost him roles in Blazing Saddles. Like Mel Brooks fired him off Blazing Saddles because he was showing up drunk. And as Charlie in Charlie's Angels, Aaron Spelling fired him because his alcoholism was so bad that he couldn't even perform in a role that is mostly voiceover.
Yeah, and the important part to note here is that, and I know where you're going with this, but who'd he marry? It was right before this. He met a wife while he was in Hong Kong. Is that who you're talking about? Well, I was going to say right before this, he was married to Elizabeth Montgomery. There was his 3rd wife, who is Sam from Bewitched.
Bewitched, yeah.
Oh,
and
okay.
he was married to her, and he had just divorced her. And he's look at him. He's the newspaper guy. He's old as fuck.
Yeah, he's 64 years old at this point.
He met his new wife in Hong Kong, which was Kim Schmidt, who was 31.
Yeah, she's a German magazine editor. And then so they meet in Hong Kong while he's shooting Game of Death. And then 3 weeks after they are married, Schmidt and Young were found dead in their apartment in Manhattan. Young had apparently shot his wife and then himself. So motive for this murder-suicide was never really discovered, but police said that there was a diary opened that they found in the apartment, opened to September 27th with the phrase, "We got married today," written on it. So he had opened to his diary to the day that they'd gotten married, and then killed his wife and then killed himself.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's wild. It's fucking wild.
Gig Young, ladies and gentlemen.
Gig Young. So for Chinese-speaking audiences, the film was dubbed in Cantonese and Mandarin and was edited significantly different, including a new opening and closing credits, and then a new theme song, and then most significantly, probably a new fight scene with Casanova Wong that takes place in a greenhouse. Now, Gary, you said your Shout Factory Blu-ray has this version. Did you?
It does have the version with that fight scene in it.
Did
the
you watch
Cantonese and Mandarin fight. No, I haven't. I saw that it's on there long enough, but I didn't get a chance to.
I was just curious because the Criterion does not have that version on there, so I was just curious about how it compares. But I guess still the rest of the film is still the rest of the film.
So it's considered, I saw in some places, like one of the best non Bruce Lee fight scene, but I don't know. I really like the stuff with Bob Wall. That was all choreographed by Sammo.
Yeah.
All of those fight scenes I thought were fantastic for what they were doing. Also, we gotta mention, by the way, Colin Camp.
Who plays Anne.
Who plays Anne.
Who does actually sing the theme song at the beginning.
She does. She was in the Police Academy movies. She's like Yvette in Clue.
Yeah.
And, she plays the wife of Noah Vanderhoff, Miss Vanderhoff in Wayne's World.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't realize that one. I knew she was in Clue. I didn't know she was in Wayne's World.
Oh, shit.
That's great.
I always worry that we're going to not have enough to talk about with some of these movies, but then we always end up we just have stories to tell. We all just find things to say about these movies. It's a lot of fun, though. I hope
there's a lot of you could call them tangents, but this is all part of the tapestry of Game of Death, like talking about Gig Young murdering his wife is still part of the story of Game of Death because they met while he was making Game of Death.
Yeah, it's so weird to think about that one just because of the idea that Bruce Lee also died technically in the middle of filming this, and like it's just tied to these weird stories.
Yeah. I gotta say, like, just because I mean, clearly I don't do a lot of the research that you guys do, but this one for me is the web of stories and pop culture influences and all that stuff is just super fascinating.
The story of the story behind this film is much more interesting than the film itself.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that in the wrap up, but yeah.
Well, yeah. So let's work our way there because I have similar thoughts. I think.
Well, the film was released in Hong Kong on March 23rd, 1978. Released a little bit later in the U.S. It came out in June of 1979. And despite the fact that it was blatantly trying to cash in on Bruce Lee's death, the film proved to be incredibly popular. It ended up being the second most successful film of Lee's career, just behind Enter the Dragon.
Wow.
Adjusted for inflation, it made about $170 million worldwide. And I think this proves just how famous Lee was and how much people wanted to see a Bruce Lee movie. This is why I said before that I think if they'd just released that 35 minutes of footage, it would have made money because people would pay to see a movie with they knew that Bruce Lee wasn't in this whole movie, but they would pay to see even a small amount of Bruce Lee on screen. That proves just how enormously famous he was at this time.
Well, it's also like a testament to studios not trusting the audience to get it or something at the time, and it takes forever. It takes up until right now that we're seeing like companies start to believe like maybe our audience is sophisticated enough to handle like some weirdness. Like you're seeing, we were joking about WandaVision right as we started recording, which is apparently like a very weird Marvel show, but it's like because they've already established Marvel and they know it's a huge success, they can afford to be odd. I guess what I'm saying is like when I mentioned earlier that this movie was as anticipated, in this genre contextually, like it was as anticipated as episode 1 coming out was for Star Wars fans. People just like, there's other Bruce Lee footage. There's more, the images were everything back then. Like if it had been online, it would have all been huge. Just off of that, just the image of Bruce Lee in the jumpsuit and that sort of thing. So people are like waiting for it. It's like they just didn't think that they could just show you Bruce Lee fighting.
Right. They had to.
Although that's what was selling the movie.
That's what we want to see. That's what that's what we're buying a ticket for. And I think it's because Bruce Lee is so electric on screen. Like I was telling Todd earlier, Gary, that I spent this entire week, like I've been eating and breathing Bruce Lee movies because I've watched every movie that he's made. I did not rewatch Enter the Dragon because I've seen that one so many times and I knew I wouldn't have time to watch them all, but I've watched every other one that's in that Criterion Greatest Hits box set. I also watched Game of Death 2. Like I've watched 5 Bruce Lee movies this week, plus just loads of special features and things like that. And the thing is, in all of his movies, and this is, I would say, the worst overall movie that he was ever involved in, easily. That's not discounting his work on the film. It obviously is not his fault that the rest of the movie wasn't great. But he just, every time he starts fighting, you cannot take your eyes off of him. And it's not just because he's such an impressive martial artist, because he is, but he's doing something so distinctly different than what other people do. And he's got a screen presence. Like even when he's doing other things, like even when he's not fighting, there's a scene in, I think it's the Fist of Fury, where he does this. He puts on like, he dresses up like a phone repairman, and he's doing this goofy, like Jerry Lewis Master of Disguise routine for 15 minutes in the film. And it's a pure comedy performance in the middle of the film. He changes his entire body, like his body language, where he's kind of slumping over and being goofy. He's got this goofy grin on his face, these big Coke bottle glasses, and he's really good at it. Like he's really good at that. Like he could have been a movie star that it was known as more than just a great martial artist. because he had screen presence.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something special about Bruce Lee that just like I literally last night on the wrestling podcast, we were having a discussion about just famous wrestlers and talking about I'll make this relevant is that it was I was just saying that like sometimes there are people that just have it. Like they just do, and it sucks. It sucks that the world works this way, but this is the way of the world, that sometimes charisma just radiates off of some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just dictate. Hulk Hogan did 3 fucking moves, like he wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world. Nobody would ever say that, but something about Hulk Hogan just made him the most famous wrestler ever.
You could say that about The Rock or about John Cena as well. They none of them were great technical wrestlers. They're better than Hulk Hogan, but none of them were great technical wrestlers, but they got by on their sheer stage presence.
Yeah,
exactly.
Charisma.
And Bruce Lee has that. Bruce Lee just has like this.
But the thing is, Bruce Lee's got the skills too.
Well, he does. Yeah, absolutely. He does have the skills. In fact, one of the things about this movie that I love too is that, I was reading a lot into Sammo because I do think we should do like a whole thing about him. And it hit me a lot with the commentary I was listening to, just saying with Mike Leader, just saying he feels like he's really underrated, like he's not appreciated. Somehow he never got that. But this is a guy like George Lucas was seeking out, like who initially George Lucas wanted to choreograph the lightsaber fights and stuff like that. Like that's he was known, but like you had to be kind of nerdy to know him. And it just at this time, another thing to think about that I picked up was that kung fu movies, these kind of movies, had come so far in 5 years. Everything just like increases exponentially. So by the time that Game of Death was released, fight scenes were choreographed at a much higher level. Like they were already like surpassing what had come before. Like they were doing like more acrobatic, more crazier stuff going on screen than what you would have had in Game of Death. But Sammo, who had been doing these movies, pulled himself back as a huge fan of Bruce Lee and as a friend of Bruce Lee and known Bruce Lee to like try to establish. So when I talk about the Bob Wall, like in the gym after the match or in the match itself, like in the Macau stuff, he's very much trying to smoothly transition to make those fight scenes not seem out of place from the stuff that you're going to get from Bruce Lee later on in the film, like when you actually get Bruce Lee. And it's not knocking Bruce Lee, by the way. It was just at the time, this was advanced for what cinema was doing. And this is still like 5 years later,
Yeah. Well, the ironic part about that is that Bruce Lee's fighting style kind of changed the way that the action was choreographed on screen, because especially in Hong Kong cinema prior to Bruce Lee, it was a lot of like wuxia movies where people were on wires and they were not moving in a way that humans really move. If you've seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that's a modern example of that style of film. And there's nothing wrong with wuxia movies. Bruce Lee was actually supposed to make one. There are images of him made up in costumes and like a hairpiece, with the knot on top to be in a wuxia movie that never got made. But that's a very different fighting style than what Bruce introduced, which was more grounded in reality.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. It's like he's doing these fight scenes, and it is grounded in reality, and it's more like straightforward fighting, like in those scenes. And so
it's kind of like it's kind of like I equate it to like the Matrix versus like Transporter. Like the Transporter stuff is a little bit grittier,
sure.
As opposed to the Matrix stuff, which is just kind of like super stylized.
Yeah, ironically, the Matrix is heavily influenced by Bruce Lee.
Right.
Yeah, and Kim
even
Tai-jong
Neo even does the nose.
He does
twitch.
the nose thing. Yeah.
Kim Tai-jong, who's the Taekwondo, like the South Korean Taekwondo expert, like he's famous for his kicks and just like he's he's like a kicking expert, which I think initially was an idea for like the levels, like going up the levels, which reminds me of The Raid, by the way.
Yeah. The Raid is very much a descendant, let's say, of this movie.
Yeah.
Or Dread.
Sammo had choreographed Kim Tai-jong to just like, let's focus in on the Bruce Lee style at this time. This is what he would have been doing. Not saying like nobody there is disrespecting him by saying Bruce Lee wouldn't have also evolved. It was just let's make this all fit in with
the footage
the footage we're going to have to use.
Right. So the movie comes out and critical reviews were mixed. A lot of the stuff that was criticized were the scenes that seemed to be in bad taste, like the funeral footage obviously was one that was pointed out regularly, or scenes like the obvious cardboard cutout taped on the mirror. Critics saw that and were kind of goofing on it, but they did praise the fight scenes and things like that, the same things that we're praising. Oh, but Gary, do you know where we're going with this?
Oh, I do. Some people just lost sleep over this movie. And they couldn't stand how bad they thought it was. And Justin, Todd, it sounds like somebody needs a nap. We'll start out with an easy one. This is DF over on Amazon. He says only one person found this helpful, by the way. It was 1 out of 5 stars. His review was, wow, wow, wow. That was his review.
That's his whole review?
That's his whole review.
How's that spelled?
It's spelled WHAWHAWHAAAAAAAAAA.
One star, huh?
1 star.
1 star.
Let's see. Here's Spooky Brattlewurst says, should have never been made is the title of the review. Simply put, this is a disaster in conception and execution. The original material shot with Lee could and should have been used in a documentary or as extra scenes in a documentary and be left at that. To go and make this abomination beggars belief and is nothing short of an insult to the memory and the man himself, who would surely be turning in his grave at this monstrosity. One example, you can see a lot of feet kicking in Kung Fu, right? Right. Lee is wearing iconic black and yellow Onitsuka tigers in his original footage, right? Damn right. Iconic. So why would you draw more attention to the fact that you have stand-ins with black and yellow Adidas on? Dumb. At least copy correctly. This person says their title of their review is Game of Boring. This is the martial arts.
How clever.
This is the martial arts version of Plan 9 from Outer Space, only not nearly as funny. When he died, Lee had only shot part of what he hoped would be a masterpiece of martial arts movies. Stuck with little film and no clue what to do with it, the producers hired a kindergarten class to write a script. They hired a man who looks nothing, repeat nothing, like Lee, and they cut the fights that were filmed and got this cinematic version of Goulash. Nothing about this movie is good except for the brief time Lee is on the screen. And to add insult to injury, in some scenes, they actually use a cut-up picture of Lee superimposed over the double's face. Just lousy. Not even superimposed, by the way, sir.
No, it's just taped on there.
It's just a cardboard cutout tape. Last but not least is what they say. This movie is horrible. Like the part where Billy gets shot and they think he's dead when really he isn't. But I did like the end where he fought Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That was interesting.
Kareem who?
That's what it is. I did like the end where he fought Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That was interesting. Even a Bruce Lee fan wouldn't like it.
Is Kareem
that
Abdul-Jabbar
related to General Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Who
is he the long lost brother of Pedro Almodovar?
I guess so. I got 2 more from IMDb. One is Tragedy is the title of this one. You're telling me he died from an allergic reaction from something he took regularly? No, it was a cover-up of the coroner lied to keep the peace because they didn't know who did it.
What?
Whoa!
That was the 1-star review for Game of Thrones.
Now that I'm done watching this movie, I'm going to the Capitol.
Yeah. We'll get a little bit from Sarah Stroh. She says, worse than laughable. If you thought Ed Wood's movies were bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Here we have a movie built around a dead guy with a story almost as dead as The Poster Child.
Jesus.
Ergo, we see Bruce Lee from the back, Bruce Lee from a distance, Bruce Lee in large dark glasses, Bruce Lee's face in shadow, etc., etc. And we hear recordings of Bruce Lee's kung fu sounds, probably mixed in with some non-Lee imitations, being played over and over and over, sounding misplaced and absolutely awful. This is not a Bruce Lee movie. It is almost Bruce Lee-less. And tactily, scenes of Bruce Lee's funeral are used to illustrate the fake funeral of the character of Billy Lowe. It is the very definition of a travesty. All the characters are walking cliches that can only be laughed at, if even that. The story is basically about tracking down bad guys and brutally killing them. Whoopee! There are a couple of semi-interesting fight scenes towards the end, but even they, as well as the in and of themselves less than terrible Bruce Lee stand-ins, I'm actually a big fan of Yud Bio, cannot salvage this movie from the abysmal status as one of the most embarrassing movies that has ever been made.
Well, man, here's the thing. Like, normally when we do these somebody needs a nap segments, I'm like, these people are ridiculous. They're, this is silly.
I was gonna
In
say.
this case, I'm like, this is one of the few cases so far where I'm like, they all kind of got a point.
Yeah, I can't really disagree here.
Because this one it's tough to review Game of Death because this is not Bruce Lee's Game of Death.
Right.
The film shares a title with a film that Lee had hoped to complete and got a few minutes of footage shot. But this is just another Brucesploitation movie. This is just a Brucesploitation movie where the producers happen to be lucky enough to own some footage that people had not seen of Bruce Lee. Because what Bruce Lee could have made, what he was working towards, could have been his masterpiece. This was supposed to be kind of the distillation of his Jeet Kune Do martial arts philosophy, the idea that one's approach to combat has to be malleable. One has to be able to adapt the skills that are brought on by one's opponent. One has to be, Jeet Kune Do is the intercepting fist. The reason he called it that is because you have to, when you see somebody attacking, you have to be able to intercept and adapt to their style. That's why it's called that. Lee famously said, and there was even a documentary out last year by this name, Be Water. He says, you put a water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put a water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot and it becomes the teapot. Like, that is the philosophy behind Jeet Kune Do. And that's what he was hoping to get across in this movie. And I really, truly think that if he had been able to do that, this would have been considered like his masterpiece.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's just, this is one of those things where they could have gone a couple different directions and salvaged, it made money. So in the end, I guess it is successful, but in terms of respect for arguably one of the most famous personalities in the 20th century, not to mention the godfather of many different schools of thought and martial arts, you can't help but think it was like, really, was this the best idea? Was this the best direction to take?
Yeah.
And of course, hindsight being 2020, the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think they would have done, I think it would have been better to have this be a full-length documentary building up to, hey, let that documentary build up to, hey, we've got this 30 minutes, and just let the last 30 minutes be what it is, which it seems like anybody who you talk to is like, really, Game of Death, it's the last 20 to 30 minutes that's really great. And just build to that and let it be interviews with everybody and his students and all that, and just
a tribute to the
let it be a
Bruce Lee.
celebration of the man rather than a very poor representation of a shadow of what he was trying to do. So,
right. And that's what the documentary that came out in 2000, Bruce Lee, A Warrior's Journey, I think it was released originally as a supplement on the Enter the Dragon DVD, the 2-disc special edition. But Bruce Lee, A Warrior's Journey, as of right now, this is one I mentioned to you a couple days ago, Todd, but it's on Amazon Prime as of this recording. It's about 90 minutes long, but it is essentially a documentary about Bruce Lee's life. And it's like a biography, but then the last 25 minutes or so is footage from Game of Death, and more footage than you get in the actual movie. But I think even and now, 20 years after that was released, that footage, that the Game of Death Redux that's in that Criterion box set, like that is the ultimate version of what we want to see out of this. You know, it is as close to Bruce Lee's intention as we'll probably ever get. Because the thing is, the movie itself, the Game of Death that we got, while it does showcase some iconic imagery and some of the best fight choreography of Lee's career, because those last 3 fights where you actually see Bruce Lee, it's a game changer in this movie. Like, you're watching this movie and all of a sudden it gets to that part and you can almost physically feel it, an uptick in quality.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, absolutely.
Well, you can, because he's also like right up against like other martial arts masters.
Right.
He's in there. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is one of his students, is allowed to like flow as smoothly and quickly. Like there's no holding back in those moves.
Right.
So the closest thing you get to it is probably when you see like Bob Wall and Samo like take on each other in the move, and you can look and see Samo's bruises on his body, and according to stuff I saw, I mean, those are legit bruises. Like, they're just reshooting, like they're fighting, and it's like, yeah, okay, like the fight scenes are fake, but when you're trying to actually display fighting, like, you're gonna get hit. It's just like, the only time you get pissed off, according to some of the stuff I was reading, was like, you know, like, I'm going for your face. And so you have a second to tits up your face. Like, you're going to get hit in the face. But then they hit you in the gut. Then you're like, what the fuck, dude? Like, it's like, it's probably like a lot like professional wrestling, to be honest with you. Like, it's probably like,
I didn't want to be the one to make that comparison, but like,
right.
Yeah. It's
just
just,
like,
you know, there's only so much that you can quote unquote fake.
Right.
You know, taking a hit's taking a hit.
Yeah.
And I like I said, I kind of lived and breathed Bruce Lee movies this week, and I watched them all, and he progressively, they're all really good. Like, all the movies that all the kung fu movies that he starred in. Obviously, we talked earlier that he'd been in quite a few things as a youth, but he progressively gets better and better in each one of these movies, and each film is better than the one before it. And I believe that's a trend that would have continued with his planned version of Game of Death. I think this would have been the culmination of everything that he had been done before. But then the version we get, because it's so wrong-headed, it just comes across as exploitative and goofy. And it is very clearly a cash grab, trying to just make money off of somebody's image that is no longer with us. And it's disrespectful. It's very disrespectful to a guy who is one of the greatest movie stars of all time, who became one of the greatest movie stars of all time with only 4 movies under his belt.
Don't you feel like they could have almost, like, what if they did just take a Game of Death and given him a writing credit on it or something, and just,
or a directing credit, because he directed the whole last act of the movie.
And just went with it, and just went with like a new cast and do the movie, you know, but don't, you know, you save, like Todd said, for a documentary, maybe like the initial Bruce Lee stuff. Like, it's not that the story's bad, or it's not, I mean, like, if you went with his original story, by the way,
right.
That, you know, you could have just done the movie, you know, hire these people, hire, what's his face to do the Taekwondo stuff, you know, like, let's Kim Tae-jung, like, hire him to be the guy. But, you know, like, let's just not try to make you think he's Bruce Lee. Let's just try to do this
when
movie.
He's clearly not Bruce Lee. And then the movie, it's very obvious that he's not Bruce Lee in the movie. And they try to do all these little dumb tricks to kind of hide Billy Lowe's face, you know.
Well, the weird part, Justin, is that, like, they don't even, it seems like there's no rhyme nor reason to where they're hiding and where they're not.
Right. Yeah. There's the scene where the scene with the mirror, where he's in his dressing room, and he sits down, and the actor's face is very clearly visible. Then it cuts to a reaction shot of Bruce Lee from another movie where he's clearly in a completely different room.
Right.
And then it cuts to that cardboard thing all within one scene. Like, it is inexplicable. And it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so goofy. And then the movie does this thing where Billy Lowe has an excuse to get plastic surgery, which would have been a good reason for why his face looks different if they'd done it earlier than like 35 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
And then because they had to cut in footage of, then there's a scene where because they had to cut in footage of an old Bruce Lee fight, that inexplicably Billy Lowe no longer has these like scars on the side of his face for one scene, so that it's in continuity with the Bruce Lee footage.
Yeah.
And then he's back to it the next scene and puts on a beard on his face when he's already had plastic surgery to change his face. Like, why is he even having to wear a fake beard? And why is he wearing a brown beard when he's got black hair? Like, there are so many dumb decisions that are made.
Because when I saw that, was like, okay, so they're going this direction. All right, so it was rough at the beginning, but this is gonna smooth out a little bit. No, it doesn't.
No, that's it too for me, dude. Like, I was like, oh, they're gonna do like he's disfigured now, so then we're gonna change his face. Like, it's like Face Off or something.
Yeah, but they don't.
Yeah.
They don't face off it. They give him 2 slits here. Then he puts on a fake beard.
He makes a fake beard. He draws it with a fucking magic marker on his 8x8
on not even his face, on actual Bruce Lee's face. And you have to wonder, like, there's a whole rabbit hole you could go down about the fact that, like, Western audiences, like, do they think Western audiences are not going to be able to tell one Asian man from another?
Just not be able to tell the difference. Yeah. That's true. That's a hard one to hit, but also another aspect of it now is, like, I always wish they hadn't done this just because of the fucking death scene, the quote unquote death scene of Billy Lowe, where it mimics exactly Brandon Lee. Like, it's well, that's a bummer. Like, that's what a way to go.
Yeah, because I mean, there was that, and I'm still floored by the funeral footage. Because when Kat and I were watching it, and I was looking at that, and I was like, okay, I know that they've cut in some stuff that was clearly not for this movie, but this looks very authentic. Oh, and then, like, the shot of him in the coffin, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck?
So I have to ask you, Todd.
That's either a really great prosthetic.
But then you see the prosthetic that the guy breaks later, and clearly they cannot make a great prosthetic.
No.
Because the guy pokes the porcelain one later, and it doesn't look anything like Bruce Lee or the guy who's playing Bruce Lee in the movie.
Right.
So, Todd, I want to ask you then, when you watch this movie, did you know the context under which it was made? As in, meaning, did you know that it was going to include footage of actors that are standing in as Bruce Lee? Because I think that's a big part of how someone experiences this movie. If you watch this movie and you don't know that, then it's going to be incredibly confusing.
It's going to be jarring as fuck.
Right. I went into this pretty cold. I knew that this was the film that he died, and I knew Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in it. And I think that's all I knew going into this. Like I said, I try to go into these pretty cold, and I knew. Again, I don't want to keep going back to my martial arts experience, but, like, as we were watching, even with the face covered as much as I was looking at the guy and telling Kat, I was like, that is not Bruce Lee. She's like, well, how do you know? He looks pretty close. I was like, he does not move like Bruce Lee. Nobody does. Nobody does. Yeah. And martial artists tend to look at their opponents, especially folks they train with fairly closely or fight on a regular basis, and see their movements as kind of a fingerprint. And Bruce Lee is so well known, even with the limited number of films that were under his belt. There was enough of him to know, if you've watched any of it, he had a very distinct fingerprint, and you can pick it out. I mean, this guy, don't get me wrong, this guy that they got, I'm sure did as best he could with what
he's a good martial artist.
Yeah,
but he's not Bruce Lee.
He's not Bruce Lee. So it's
he'd still kick my ass.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting part about this for me, to throw in here too, is I went down a rabbit hole of reading about, given the circumstances of why we're discussing this movie, the overarching project we're on with Quentin Tarantino and Kill Bill. This one is more interesting than the others in some ways, in the fact that Quentin Tarantino has gone on beyond Kill Bill to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and actually depicting Bruce Lee.
You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
And and so it was
not only depicting Bruce Lee, but depicting other parts of this story, like Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring and the Wrecking Crew, the movie that Bruce Lee was the coordinator on. And not only that, but Cliff Robertson, the character that Brad Pitt plays, is based on Jean LaBelle.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's an interesting concept because, I mean, he was met with some dissatisfaction,
including from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah, and Bob Wall. Like people that were not fans of Quentin Tarantino's portrayal of Bruce Lee on screen. And that was, I mean, I could just tell it just straight out, and we can get you guys thoughts on this, but like, I mean, I know when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did a whole thing in the Hollywood Reporter, I believe it was, like about this and how Quentin Tarantino's portrayal of Bruce Lee was racist, and that he was saying that, you know, amongst other things, like one of his big issues was he's like the fact that Bruce Lee is portrayed in this fight scene with Brad Pitt's character in the first place. Well, actually, I think he and Bob Wall both testified to, like, I was in multiple places with Bruce Lee where people picked fights with him and he walked away from all of those fights every single time.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, and this is maybe a conversation for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood episode down the line, but I feel like the difference is that he's creating a new character, a fictional character, who in the fictional world that Tarantino creates in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, this is a guy who could potentially beat Bruce Lee, right? Not in real life. Nobody in real life could beat Bruce Lee. But in the world, in this world of Quentin Tarantino, which already is an alternate history where the Manson family gets stopped and where Hitler gets shot in the face with a Tommy gun, right? This is a fictional world, and Brad Pitt's character, yes, was based on guys like Jean LaBelle, but he is not. He is a fictional character.
Well, and to be fair, because I'm also with you on that, but then also a point that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar brought up that I kind of mentioned earlier, but that I thought would be worth mentioning for the sake of argument, is that he was saying these characters like Brad Pitt's character are playing these John Wayne old school, like, white guys that are stuntmen, and they're coming in here and they think like, oh, your kung fu fancy stuff doesn't work here. Like, we're badasses over here. He was like, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was pointing out, he's like, this is literally the stuff that Bruce Lee was opposing his whole life. This is what he was fighting against, was like these guys coming in here saying his crap was stupid, and you know,
he'll
like,
kick your ass,
and we'll kick your ass. Like, that doesn't make sense. And he's like, Bruce Lee had to like fight to make himself relevant. And
no, I totally understand that argument. I really do.
I think it speaks to two things. I think it speaks to how we hold our pop culture figures, especially here in this country, with reverence of, you know, of a philosopher, of a teacher, of a guru. A lot of people think Bruce Lee, like I mentioned it at the top of the episode, they have this notion that he was this great philosopher. No, he was just a guy. And then the staying power of someone like Bruce Lee. Yeah. You know, when Muhammad Ali passed away, which wasn't that long ago, he hadn't done anything in the public eye for a couple decades. Yeah. And people went nuts. Bruce died. When did he die? 74?
73.
73?
Yeah.
Like, and people to this day, like, again, it's a fictional representation that QT put forward. and people were pissed about it. To be honest, I sat and watched the movie and was just kind of like, this is kind of bullshit. But yeah, I get it.
I mean, I definitely get the argument, and I get both sides of that.
Yeah.
I get where everyone in that argument is coming from. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the way that we see legends like Bruce Lee is really interesting. Like I think of James Dean as well, another movie star that died very, very young, even younger than Bruce Lee, and with less movies under his belt. But he's seen as like this Hollywood icon. But that's partially spurred by the fact that he did die so young. Same with Kurt Cobain.
I was about to say, I mean, the other one you can think of is Kurt Cobain. Like, what would he be doing right now?
Exactly.
Yeah. He was
like Bruce Lee would have turned 80 years old this past year. What would he still be doing? If he'd lived that long.
If he was anything like my grandmaster was, he
still
did it. He did it till the day he died, man.
Right. Well, here's the thing with Game of Death. Just kind of in closing, it is not a good movie.
No,
I think we can all agree on that. It is
right.
It is a goofy ass movie. I think Robert Klaus, the director, did his best with what he had to work with, but I think it is just the blatant exploitative nature of it that is just icky.
Yeah.
But then you get to that finale. You get to those last 12 minutes or so of the movie.
Yeah.
And you get to see, and you are reminded of just how good Bruce Lee is. And those last 12 minutes are fucking glorious. Like they are, especially compared to the previous hour and 45 minutes or whatever you've been hanging out in the rest of this movie. Those last 12 minutes are like a revelation. And you're like, this is not only great, this is possibly the best thing Lee has ever done in these moments. And so it really makes you even more sad about the rest of the movie and the fact that you didn't get to see his final vision really on screen, Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
And then oddly enough, we've mentioned it in passing, but this movie, like we said, it was successful enough to garner a sequel. Game of Death 2 came out in 1981, and it uses some of the same tricks that this Game of Death, Robert Klaus's Game of Death, does. Recycles scenes of Bruce Lee from his older movies. I watched it this morning. I'd never seen it, and it is, I'm going to say, a better movie than Game of Death.
Really?
Because it does this thing. So it's got the same, Kim Tai-chung is playing Billy Lowe again. He returns as Billy Lowe, but Billy Lowe dies, like actually dies, about half an hour into the movie. And then his brother, who is also played by Kim Tai-chung, comes to look into his death. And it's just like more of a straight up martial arts movie. So it does use a little bit of Bruce Lee footage, a little bit in that first half an hour. But then because Billy Lowe dies, it does not feel the need to do that for the rest of the movie. Right. So for the next hour, you don't have to worry about that. And it's just a straightforward kung fu movie. And it's really fun. There is it is established that the one of the main villains has lions on his property, and you see real lions crawling all over this like safari vehicle that he and Billy Lowe are in. And then later in the film, there's this incredible scene where Bobby Lowe actually is the character's name. Bobby Lowe is the brother, and he's being seduced by this naked white woman, and she's about to poison him, and a lion jumps through the window. But it is very, very clearly a dude dressed up in a lion suit and running around on all fours and fighting Bruce Lee. And it's amazing. And then the movie ends in a literal underground lair where he finds this hidden, like elevator, goes underground. And it looks like something out of Dr. No. It looks like something out of a James Bond movie. And even when Bobby Lowe gets in fights down there, all of the henchmen are dressed in like shiny silver jumpsuits, like from a James Bond henchman. It's amazing. And the fight choreography is outstanding. It's really silly. And it's just a much better movie than the regular Game of Death.
Wow.
So I would recommend checking that out, which I guess brings me to our new feature.
For viewing.
Because Game of Death 2, I would say, is recommended viewing based on this movie.
Just if you were disappointed by this one, check
this other one out.
Check out the sequel.
Check the other Game of Death.
Yeah, it's better.
I'm based on your description. My recommended viewing is going to be Dragon Lives Again.
Yes.
stop drilling you struck oil with me.
Right.
That sounds so bonkers. I have to see that.
Yes, I'm not going to argue with that.
I'm gonna throw Ip Man in there. Recommend
Yeah.
viewing. Like you have to watch Ip
all
Man.
of them. Honestly, I haven't seen the fourth one, but the first three are excellent. They're a little cheesy. Like they're a little. They delve into the melodramatic a little more than I would like. But Donnie Yen's a badass,
Oh yeah.
and the fight
Like
scenes.
if you loved him in Rogue One, like hang on, like
The fight
those
scenes
movies are so
really-
awesome.
really are outstanding. And I would also have to say, hopefully this is not your first Bruce Lee movie.
I was literally about to say, like, oh, here's the other ones, like The Way of the Dragon, Enter the
Yeah.
Dragon.
Yeah, I mean,
Fist
hopefully
of
you've-
Fury.
Hopefully, if you've watched Game of Death, you've at least seen Enter the Dragon. But if you haven't, check out Enter the Dragon. But out of the other three that he made, I would highly, highly recommend, I mean, all of them, but especially Way of the Dragon, which is the one that he wrote and directed. That's the one that ends in the Roman Colosseum. It's set in Rome. He filmed on location at the Roman Colosseum and fights Chuck Norris in what is one of the best on-screen hand-to-hand combat fights that has ever existed.
Nice.
It's outstanding. And the whole movie's really good. Honestly, the whole movie is very, very good. But that finale with Chuck Norris doesn't show up until an hour and 10 minutes into the movie. He shows up. He's never mentioned in the movie. He shows up as like a henchman for the main bad guy, kicks some other dude's ass, and then is like the final boss in the main fight at the end because it's just him and Bruce Lee. And they fight for 10 minutes. Like it is a long fight. And it is really, really good.
I'm going to tell you, though, Kim Tai-jong, I don't know where his career is gone or, but he's legitimately good. And the Sammo choreographed fights, if you get to Billy Joe goes to, or Low, is it Billy Joe?
Low.
Billy
Billy Joe.
Billy Joel.
Billy Joe Armstrong.
That's the movie I want to see.
Billy Low Armstrong. It's
Billy Low Armstrong. If you get to where he goes to Macau, that's the part where it gets good. Like it legitimately does get pretty good there. The fight scenes are legit. Sammo is like choreographing those fight scenes. So like the fight between Sammo and Bob Wall, and then later Kim Jong versus Bob Wall, like in the dressing room. And it's a complete callback to, I think, The Way of the Dragon, if I'm not mistaken. Like he almost does the same charge up and then like kick into the locker. Like there's callbacks throughout. Those are good fight scenes. Like they're legitimately good.
There
fight
are
scenes.
good fight scenes in the movie. They're just the story surrounding them is not.
Yeah, it's
Up to
before
par.
you get to the Bruce Lee thing, which, by the way, the Bruce Lee thing, I don't think I've ever seen two people fight with nunchucks that it legitimately worked. I don't
It's
think
so good,
that's-
dude. It's Bruce Lee with nunchucks blows my mind
And
every
it was
time
fun.
because he
It's fun
does it.
watching
He
him
does it in
go.
Way of
Like-
the Dragon too, but he's not fighting another guy. But he is so fast with those nunchucks, and I know how. I mean, not from experience, but I know how hard those must be. Because I would immediately smack myself in the face and break my nose. And he goes so fast with those things.
And you get it a little bit in this one too, like where he like pops him in the face too, and he's like, "How you like that?" Like he's got like the like, and
Yeah.
it's just it's fun. Like there's
is
some
really fun.
there's some legit good stuff.
That's the thing. This movie is worth watching if you're a fan of Bruce Lee, even out of curiosity, because like I said before, those last few minutes are worth the price of admission. But if you want to see the true representation, check out that Criterion Blu-ray, check out the Game of Death Redux, that 35-minute full edited sequence. Just absolutely incredible stuff. So
Yeah, I just
What's the name of the movie where it's the guy from Jungle Book playing him?
that's Dragon, the Bruce Lee story.
Oh, that's Dragon the Bruce Lee story. Okay. I wanted to revisit that because I saw that years and years ago and loved it. But
hell yeah, I love it now. I've been talking about it.
yeah.
I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
Jason
so-
Lee is his name. And,
from Mallrats.
No, not that Jason Lee. I think that's right. Hold on, I gotta look this up real quick because that's funny. Dragon the Bruce Lee story, starring. Let's see here. Where's the IMDb? It stars. Jason
Scott Lee. Jason Scott Lee.
and Lauren
Directed and
Holly.
co-written. Wait, directed and co-written by Rob Cohen of Fast and Furious fame.
Hey,
Whoa, wait
there
a
you
minute.
go.
Based on the book by Robert Klaus.
What? Oh man!
So
we don't have
That's
time
the
to.
mini episode.
We do not have time to go down this rabbit hole right now. We got to wrap this shit
the
up. We've been
director
talking
of
for
this
2
movie
hours.
wrote the book this movie was based on.
Oh my god, what is happening? So let's wrap this up, friends.
All right.
We'll talk about Dragon later. I guess we'll have to it now. But next week we're moving on. We mentioned the Shaw Brothers earlier in this episode as the studio that Bruce Lee turned down. But if you're talking about Kill Bill, you got to talk about the Shaw Brothers. So there's a variety of Shaw Brothers movies that you could talk about for this series. None of them are really specifically referenced in Kill Bill, as a single movie. Just the Shaw Brothers' entire kind of vibe, their entire production is referenced in. I mean, literally, there's a Shaw Brothers logo at the beginning of Kill Bill. So we decided to pick a Shaw Brothers movie that we thought was probably, if you were going to start with any Shaw Brothers movie, this is the one you start with, probably their most famous, from 1978, same year as Game of Death. We're going to be talking about 36 Chamber of Shaolin. If you've ever listened to Wu-Tang, you know all about it. So we're going to talk about that next week. It should be really fun. Then we'll have one more degree of Kill Bill before we get to the movie itself in a couple more weeks. So
here's another one added tidbit of trivia. The guy who plays Stick, which, by the way, is the name of the guy who trained Daredevil. Yeah, but Mel Novak, he's still going strong at 80 years old, almost 80. Next year, he'll be 80. He just this year had a movie come out called Apex Predators. And he was used by Robert Klaus, who wrote the book that Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, was based off of, and directed Game of Death. But he was in Black Belt Jones, The Ultimate Warrior, Game of Death, and Force 5. So he's like a Hong Kong guy, like the Westerner that's in these Hong Kong movies. But he has a movie that came out this year called Apex Predators about a shark. Here's the premise. The bodies of beachgoers begin washing ashore during the grand opening of a new resort. The town mayor attempts to cover it up with dire
I've seen
results.
this movie.
Wait a minute. Hang on.
Mel Novak is in this movie. And
really
guess what his
familiar.
character's name is? His name is in the
Brody.
movie. No, it's Robert Klaus Williamson.
What? Oh, this is so strange. It's so weird. Anyway, let's wrap this up, fellas. We have overstayed our welcome because there's just so much to talk about with this movie, but we hope everyone enjoyed this because this has been a really fun one to research and look into. Do you guys want to let everyone know where you can be found on the internet? Todd, we'll start with you.
All right.
Rod, Mr. Rod J. Davis. Dr. Rod
Yes.
J. Davis.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to send all of my social media. If you'd like to contact Dr. Rod J. Davis, please head over to just go ahead and send it to at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all.
You've taken over his socials.
Yeah.
I get
In
it.
the will.
I mean,
Go
he's
ahead
dead,
and send it to him.
He was gifted it in the will.
the COVID got him.
Yeah, I think so.
Gary.
I'm at This is Gary Horn on all of the things.
I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find the show at cinema_shock at Instagram, Twitter. Find us on Facebook. Find us at cinemashock.net, where you can find all of our episodes, links to where you can subscribe. You can find links to our merch, buy our t-shirts and mugs and skateboards. If you want a Cinema Shock skateboard, buy a Cinema Shock skateboard. They exist. But until next week,
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
and be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys, my friend. Johnny has the keys.
Oh, so you go to the Bruce Lee thing.
A little bit.
Whoa! Whoa!